we instinctively lock our doors and pull our blinds to keep the horrors of the outside world from looking in. But what happens when the monster is already inside, holding the camera? The terrifying truth is that some predators are not satisfied with simply committing a crime. They want to hit record and replay their actions, which brings us to a highly decorated military commander who meticulously documented his own descent into absolute depravity. The sterile air of the Ontario Provincial Police interrogation room hummed with the faint buzz of fluorescent lights. Detective Jim Smith pushed a glossy photograph across the metal table. The image displayed a distinct tire tread impression left in the snow outside a rural home. Across the table sat Colonel Russell Williams, the base commander of Canada's most critical military installation. He stared down at the tread pattern matching his own Nissan Pathfinder. The commander maintained absolute silence, but his rigid posture betrayed a sudden, terrifying realization. Investigators were standing at the edge of a massive hidden digital archive. He knew the police were hours away from uncovering hundreds of meticulously cataloged files. Those files documented a secret, sadistic double life no one had ever suspected. The town of Trenton, Ontario, sits on the northern shore of the Bay of Quinte. Spanning nearly 1,000 acres on the eastern edge of the community lies Canadian Forces Base Trenton. This facility served as the primary transport hub for the entire Canadian military. Cargo planes roared over the quiet residential streets at all hours of the day and night. At the absolute top of this massive organizational hierarchy sat Colonel Russell Williams. He was a highly decorated pilot who commanded the respect of every soldier on the tarmac. He had personally flown foreign dignitaries, including Queen Elizabeth II and the Prime Minister of Canada. To the public eye, he represented the absolute pinnacle of discipline, honor, and national pride. Behind the ironed uniforms and polished medals hid a deeply fractured psyche. Williams harbored escalating, obsessive urges that he kept entirely separated from his public persona. He maintained a pristine cottage in Tweed located about 45 kilometers north of the base. The dark wooded roads between Trenton and Tweed provided the perfect geographical cover for his nighttime excursions. Under the cloak of darkness, the esteemed commander began prowling the quiet neighborhoods surrounding his properties. He targeted specific homes, testing locks and slipping through unlocked windows while the occupants slept. During these early intrusions, he focused entirely on stealing undergarments and taking private photographs. He would pose in the stolen clothing inside the victims' bedrooms, ensuring he captured the surrounding personal items in the frame. These early intrusions revealed a glaring systemic blind spot in the regional law enforcement network. Local civilian police forces handled the reports of stolen garments as low-priority nuisance crimes. Officers took basic statements but rarely cross-referenced these minor property thefts with neighboring jurisdictions. The military police operating on the base maintained entirely separate databases from the civilian authorities. This absolute lack of interagency communication created an invisible wall protecting the commander. No one imagined that a top-tier military leader could be the neighborhood prowler. Because the crimes involved no physical harm, detectives filed the reports away in disparate, unconnected folders. The fragmented system effectively granted the predator a safe environment to refine his methods. The situation escalated into a terrifying new reality in late 2009. Williams turned his attention toward 37-year-old Marie-France Camas, a flight attendant serving under his own command. Her modest home stood on a quiet residential street in Brighton, just west of the military base. In late November, the commander breached the perimeter of her house while she was completely alone. He cornered her in her own sanctuary, utilizing his physical size and military discipline to force total compliance. During the horrific ordeal, he systematically dismantled her sense of safety through prolonged psychological terror. He forced her to endure unspeakable violations while recording every single moment on his digital camera. The highly respected officer ultimately stole her future, leaving behind a profound tragedy in the tight-knit military community. Just 2 months later, in January 2010, the predator fixed his sights on 27-year-old Jessica Lloyd. She lived in an isolated rural property flanked by deep snowbanks along Highway 37. William stalked the property for days, mapping out the entry points and familiarizing himself with her routine. He broke into the home under the cover of a freezing winter night. He subjected the young woman to the same agonizing process of captivity and documentation. After forcing her to comply with his demands on camera, he ended her life and transported her away from the property. The sudden absence of the beloved local woman sent immediate shockwaves through the surrounding rural towns. Friends and family plastered telephone poles with missing person flyers, completely unaware of the grim reality. The disappearance of Jessica Lloyd forced investigators to re-examine the recent tragedy involving Marie-France Comeau. Detectives from the Ontario Provincial Police established a joint task force to pool their resources. They began reviewing the scattered reports of neighborhood prowlers and mysterious home invasions from the previous 2 years. A chilling pattern finally emerged from the chaotic stacks of paperwork. The geographical cluster of the break-in formed a perfect ring around the military base and the town of Tweed. Investigators realized they were hunting a highly organized individual who possessed an intimate knowledge of the region. The predator had been operating in plain sight, evolving from a Vavarf into a lethal threat. The race to identify the suspect began before another innocent person could meet a violent end. The breakthrough in the investigation started at the perimeter of Jessica Lloyd's rural property. Forensic teams secured the frozen driveway, meticulously scanning the ice for any physical anomalies. A technician located a set of distinct tire tracks pressed deeply into a fresh patch of snow near the rear entrance. They poured specialized casting material into the frozen impressions to preserve the exact dimensions of the tread. The plaster molds revealed a specific, aggressive tread pattern commonly found on large sport utility vehicles. Detectives recognized that this physical evidence was the only concrete link connecting the phantom suspect to the location. They cross-referenced the tread design with major tire manufacturers across North America. The search confirmed the tracks belonged to a specific brand of all-terrain tire used on Nissan Pathfinders and similar trucks. Armed with this crucial forensic detail, the task force organized a massive, unprecedented roadblock operation. Officers set up checkpoints on Highway 37, forcing every single passing vehicle to come to a halt. Uniformed officers walked the lines of stopped cars, peering at tires with heavy-duty flashlights. They subjected hundreds of local commuters to visual inspections and brief roadside interviews. This tedious process generated massive traffic delays and widespread frustration among the rural community. During the height of the operation, a gleaming Nissan Pathfinder rolled up to the police barricade. The driver lowered the window, revealing the stern, familiar face of Colonel Russell Williams. An officer shined his light onto the front left wheel and instantly recognized the aggressive tread pattern. The patrolman documented the license plate and let the commander pass, initiating a quiet, high-stakes surveillance operation. The task force immediately ran the license plate through their provincial databases. The system blagged the owner as the highest-ranking military official in the entire region. Detectives faced an absolute administrative nightmare due to strict protocols regarding military personnel. Standard civilian police procedure required extensive authorization to investigate a sitting base commander. The rigid legal framework mandated that local police informed military liaisons, risking a catastrophic intelligence leak. This bureaucratic hurdle forced investigators to move at a painfully slow pace to avoid compromising the case. They drafted search warrants using extremely cautious language, knowing a single procedural error would destroy their efforts in court. Detectives spent agonizing days verifying the tire match without alerting the military chain of command. On February 7, 2010, detectives formally invited the commander to the police station for a voluntary interview. Williams walked through the heavy glass doors of the detachment with absolute military confidence. He sat down in the small windowless interrogation room, completely unaware of the trap closing around him. Detective Jim Smith took the lead, utilizing a highly calculated, non-confrontational interview technique. The detective spoke in soft, measured tones, initially treating the colonel as an important community witness. He asked mundane questions about the commander's daily commute and his familiar routes along the highway. Williams answered with practiced ease, relying on his formidable intelligence and authoritative demeanor to control the narrative. The suspect offered a completely fabricated alibi, claiming he had spent the night of the disappearance alone in his cottage. The psychological duel dragged on for hours, with the detective slowly tightening the informational net. Smythe began placing photographs of the tire impressions and boot prints on the metal table. He carefully explained the irrefutable science of forensic casting and treadwear analysis. The detective explicitly pointed out the unique imperfections in the plaster mold that matched the commander's vehicle perfectly. He then presented toll booth records placing the Nissan Pathfinder directly on the route to the victim's house. The flawless military posture began to dissolve right in front of the hidden camera. Williams crossed his arms, lowered his head, and stared at the undeniable physical evidence resting on the table. The absolute silence in the room signaled the total collapse of his carefully constructed double life. The crushing weight of the evidence finally broke him. Williams looked up at the detective. He quietly admitted to everything. The commander surrendered his keys. He drew a map on a blank sheet of paper. The ink outlined the exact location of Jessica Lloyd's remains in a remote wooded area. He then directed investigators to his pristine residence in Tweed. He told them exactly where to look for the hidden archives. Tactical units breached the quiet cottage in Tweed. Forensic teams marched directly into the primary bedroom. They dismantled the ceiling tiles overhead. Hidden inside the rafters sat a collection of external hard drives. Cybercrime specialists transported the devices to a secure laboratory. Technicians bypassed the basic encryption. The digital folders opened, the screen populated with thousands of high-resolution images. The sheer volume of the visual evidence horrified the hardened investigators. The files provided an immaculate chronological record of absolute terror. Williams had photographed himself inside dozens of local homes. He posed menacingly over the beds of sleeping residents. The folders contained the excruciating final moments of Marie-France Comeau and Jessica Lloyd. The predator had forced his victims to perform for the camera. He documented their profound despair with clinical precision. The digital timeline proved he had acted completely alone. The most respected military official in the nation was officially unmasked as a ruthless monster. In October 2010, Russell Williams faced a packed courtroom in Belleville, Ontario. To spare the families the agonizing trauma of a prolonged trial, he pleaded guilty to 88 criminal charges. These charges included 2 counts of first-degree taking of life and multiple counts of violent home invasion. The presiding judge condemned the former commander for his absolute lack of humanity and predatory nature. The court handed down 2 concurrent sentences of life imprisonment. The legal mandate removed any possibility of parole for 25 consecutive years. Authorities transported the disgraced officer to a maximum security penitentiary to serve his term in total isolation. The revelation triggered a massive systemic overhaul within the Canadian Armed Forces. The military immediately convened an unprecedented tribunal to address the catastrophic failure in their vetting protocols. Officials formally stripped Williams of his prestigious rank and forcefully revoked all of his service medals. The military command ordered the complete destruction of his uniforms and the burning of his service records. The base in Trenton permanently altered its internal security measures to allow seamless data sharing with civilian police. Families of the victims filed extensive civil lawsuits to ensure the predator could never profit from his infamy. The tight-knit rural community slowly began to heal, though the psychological scars left by the betrayer would remain forever. Russell Williams meticulously documented his atrocities to fuel his own solitary, sadistic ego. His hidden cameras captured the horror in quiet, isolated rooms far away from the public eye. But other dangerous minds crave a much larger, more chaotic audience for their visual records. Some predators utilize the lens not to hide in the shadows, but to broadcast their deep-seated hatred directly to the world. They aim to permanently scar the global consciousness by turning ordinary suburban landscapes into heavily televised war zones. This terrifying desire for absolute infamy brings us to another chilling piece of recorded history. Weeks before executing a highly coordinated attack, two heavily armed teenagers sat in a basement talking directly into a camcorder. Weeks before carrying out one of the most infamous school attacks in American history, two teenagers sat in a dim suburban basement talking directly into the lens of a camcorder. The harsh light cast long shadows against the paneled walls as they offered mocking apologies to their parents. They displayed a growing arsenal of pipe bombs and illegally acquired firearms, holding the cold steel up to the camera lens. They were documenting their own descent into absolute darkness. The chilling recordings would eventually become the most sought after pieces of criminal evidence in the nation, yet the public would never see them. Littleton, Colorado, in the late 1990s represented the quintessential American suburban dream. Neat rows of split-level homes lined quiet streets, surrounded by the towering silhouette of the Rocky Mountains in the distance. Commuters drove down wide, well-paved avenues, returning each evening to manicured lawns and the deafening hum of cicadas in the warm summer months. Colomadine High School sat at the heart of this idyllic community, a sprawling brick complex complete with pristine athletic fields and wide corridors. Students filled those halls with the typical anxieties and aspirations of adolescence, completely unaware of the looming shadow gathering within their own ranks. Among this sea of teenagers were Eric Harris and Dylan Kelbold, two seniors who blended seamlessly into the background noise of the suburban landscape. They drove unremarkable cars, wore standard baggy clothing typical of the era, and worked regular shifts at a local pizza shop. To the outside observer, they were merely two awkward boys trying to navigate the complex social hierarchy of high school. Beneath this veneer of normalcy, a profound and venomous hatred festered entirely unnoticed by the adults in charge. Harris maintained a heavily curated personal website hosted on a primitive corner of the internet where he aired his darkest grievances. He typed out long, rambling manifestos railing against the society he felt rejected him, directing his vitriol at classmates, teachers, and neighbors. His digital footprint revealed a mind obsessed with destruction, featuring step-by-step instructions on constructing improvised explosive devices using household chemicals. The physical geography of his life centered heavily around the basement of his family home. Located just a few miles from the school campus, this subterranean space became a sanctuary for his toxic ideology, insulated by thick walls and the oblivious comfort of the house above. He collected materials with methodical precision, storing nails, ball bearings, and propane canisters in dark corners away from prying eyes. The victims they would eventually target were going about their daily routines, entirely oblivious to the trap being set mere miles away. The point of no return arrived in the early spring of 1999, when the two boys procured a handheld camcorder and brought it into the Harris family basement. They pressed the red record button, initiating a series of chilling home videos that investigators would later dub the basement tapes. Staring directly into the glass lens, They stripped away any remaining facade of suburban normalcy and laid bare their apocalyptic intentions. The cramped, dimly lit room provided the perfect backdrop for their grotesque theatrical performance, isolated entirely from the bright Colorado sun outside. They sat in folding chairs, surrounded by the physical manifestation of their rage, taking turns holding the camera and addressing their future audience. They laid out their twisted motivations with cold calculation, speaking not as troubled youths but as self-appointed arbiters of life and death. The boys outlined an intricate strategy to destroy the sprawling school complex, pointing to hand-drawn maps of the cafeteria and library. They explicitly detailed their desire to trap hundreds of their peers inside the brick walls, ensuring maximum devastation. The physical evidence captured on these magnetic tapes proved that this was not a sudden snapping of reality, but a highly organized operation. Harris held up a modified shotgun, tracing his fingers along the shortened barrel while boasting about the sheer kinetic power of the weapon. They displayed heavy duffel bags packed tightly with shrapnel-filled pipe bombs, explaining the chemical composition and the blast radius of each device. The camera captured the heavy metallic clink of ammunition boxes being stacked on the concrete floor, a stark auditory contrast to their teenage laughter. They even filmed themselves driving through the quiet streets of Littleton, pointing the lens at the very neighborhoods they planned to shatter. In one particularly disturbing segment, they mocked the future sorrow of their victims, anticipating the grief and trauma they were about to inflict on the families. The tapes served as both a diary and a deliberate psychological weapon designed to leave a permanent scar on the American consciousness. By committing their plans to videotape, they crossed a psychological threshold, transforming abstract fantasies into an inescapable impending reality. The most infuriating aspect of this impending tragedy lay hidden within the dusty filing cabinets of the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office, detailing a massive systemic failure more than a year prior. In the early months of 1998, the parents of a student named Brooks Brown discovered the violent threats posted on the public website. The digital pages contained specific, targeted death threats against their son alongside boastful claims about manufacturing functional pipe bombs. The terrified parents immediately printed these pages and drove to the local police precinct, laying the glaring red flags directly on an investigator's desk. Investigator Michael Guerrara took the report, read the horrifying digital confessions, and even began drafting an affidavit for a search warrant of the Harris home. The affidavit explicitly cited the suspect's possession of explosives and his stated desire to use them, providing undeniable legal justification to intervene. However, due to a severe breakdown in departmental protocol and an inexplicable lack of administrative oversight, that search warrant never saw the inside of a courtroom. The paperwork languished on a desk. The investigation stalled completely, and the immediate threat was brushed aside as mere teenage angst. With the legal system failing to intervene, the boys utilized the remainder of 1998 to meticulously escalate their preparations without any law enforcement interference. Following an unrelated arrest for breaking into a van to steal electronics, they were placed into a juvenile diversion program rather than facing serious charges. During their required meetings with diversion counselors, they perfected the art of manipulation, offering firm handshakes, polite nods, and counterfeit remorse. The counselors noted their excellent progress, officially discharging them from the program early while remaining completely blind to the darkness growing at home. Behind closed doors, they used their restored freedom to attend a local gun show at the county fairgrounds, a massive venue filled with private vendors, exploiting a glaring legal loophole that allowed private sellers to bypass background checks. They utilized an 18-year-old friend to purchase a rifle and 2 shotguns on their behalf. They handed over crisp cash in a crowded exhibition hall, walking away with lethal firepower while the authorities remained entirely oblivious. The sheer ease of this transaction emboldened them further, confirming their twisted belief that the adult world was too incompetent to stop them. Returning to the isolation of the basement, they transformed the space into a makeshift armory and chemical workshop. They purchased standard hacksaws from a local hardware store, using the abrasive metal blades to sever the wooden stocks and steel barrels of the shotguns. The heavy scent of metal shavings and gun oil filled the enclosed room as they reduced the weapons to concealable lengths. A federal felony committed openly in a suburban home. Simultaneously, they visited rural retail stores to acquire large quantities of propane tanks, the type typically used for backyard summer barbecues. They spent their evenings hollowing out carbon dioxide cartridges, filling the small metal cylinders with match heads and gunpowder harvested from firecrackers. They taped heavy construction nails and steel ball bearings to the exterior of these crude devices, designed specifically to maximize the physical trauma inflicted on human tissue. Every step of this manufacturing process required time, funding, and deliberate effort, entirely contradicting the later narrative that they acted on a sudden impulse. The failure of the initial 1998 investigation granted them this crucial, uninterrupted timeline to build their arsenal. As the calendar turned to April of 1999, the boys sat down in front of the camcorder for their final definitive recording sessions. The physical geography of their plan was now locked in, centering heavily on the school cafeteria, a large open space with a sprawling layout and massive exterior glass windows. They calculated the lunch schedules with cold precision, determining the exact minute when the maximum number of students would be confined within those walls. On camera, they laid out the tactical gear they had purchased, including heavy black trench coats designed to conceal the modified weaponry and bulky ammunition belts. They recorded their final farewells, adopting a tone of arrogant superiority as they sneered at the camera lens one last time. They left the tapes deliberately sitting out in the open on a bedroom counter, a calculated move to ensure law enforcement would discover their manifesto. The tapes stood as a permanent testament to the complete failure of the adult world to recognize the warning signs, a physical monument to their unchecked hatred. The countdown had reached 0, and the quiet suburban landscape of Littleton was about to experience a permanent, irreversible shattering. The morning of April 20th, 1999, broke with clear skies as the boys arrived at the school parking lot. They carried heavy duffel bags inside, placing the massive propane devices directly in the center of the crowded cafeteria. The timers ticked down silently while they walked back outside to their vehicles. They waited in the bright sunlight for the massive explosion, but the intricate chemical mechanisms failed to detonate. The cafeteria remained standing, forcing the boys to abandon their primary bombing strategy. They drew their concealed weapons and began their assault on the exterior steps. The loud, sharp cracks of gunfire shattered the quiet morning air as students fell on the grass. Panic erupted instantly, and the illusion of safety vanished forever. They breached the heavy glass doors of the school, the interior hallways filled with thick, acrid smoke. Fire alarms blared relentlessly, drowning out the cries for help. They moved methodically down the corridors until they eventually breached the heavy wooden doors of the school library. Dozens of terrified teenagers cowered beneath wooden tables, but the physical space offered zero protection. The boys stalked through the aisles, taunting their victims with cruel remarks. The devastating siege lasted exactly 49 minutes, ensuring 13 innocent lives met a brutal, permanent end. 24 others sustained severe life-altering injuries before the perpetrators retreated to a corner of the library. They turned their weapons on themselves, ending their own lives before law enforcement could enter the room. In the immediate aftermath of the tragedy, grieving families and a stunned nation demanded absolute answers regarding how such a massive failure of security occurred. Investigators, cordoning off the perpetrators' homes, quickly located the basement tapes sitting exactly where the boys had left them. When the contents of the magnetic tapes were viewed by authorities, the horrifying reality of the premeditation sent shockwaves through the law enforcement community. The footage confirmed that the attack was not a spontaneous act of retaliation, but a deeply calculated domestic terror operation. Furthermore, journalists soon uncovered the buried 1998 police report filed by the Brown family, exposing the severe administrative incompetence of the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office. The revelation that the police held the legal power to stop the tragedy a full year prior, yet failed to act on the drafted search warrant, infuriated the victims' families. The legal loopholes regarding private firearm sales also came under intense national scrutiny, though significant systemic changes proved agonizingly slow. The victims' families faced an unimaginably painful reality, forced to rebuild their shattered lives while navigating a complex web of legal settlements and public inquiries, citing profound fears that releasing the visual recordings would inspire future copycats and give the perpetrators the posthumous fame they desperately craved. Authorities made a controversial decision. The Jefferson County Sheriff's Office adamantly refused to release the basement tapes to the general public, sealing the magnetic cassettes in a highly secure evidence vault. For over a decade, the tapes remained locked away in total darkness, a hidden nightmare accessible only to a select few investigators and legal personnel. Finally, in the year 2011, authorities officially destroyed the original cassettes and all corresponding copies to ensure they would never see the light of day. The legacy of Columbine forever altered the fabric of American schools, replacing quiet innocence with lockdown drills and heavy security presences. While these two teenagers recorded their darkest intentions in the isolation of a suburban basement, they were far from the only ones using camera lenses to document their horrific actions. Across the country, another seemingly ordinary man was operating under a far more deceptive guise, hiding a darkroom filled with unspeakable polaroids. In the quiet hours of April 1988, a terrifying scene shattered the calm of a residential Kansas City street. A young man wearing nothing but a heavy leather dog collar around his neck threw his battered body through a second-story glass window. He plummeted to the ground below, sprinting in a panic toward a passing neighbor, while gasping for help. When local law enforcement breached the locked door of the house he had just escaped, they uncovered a hidden darkroom. Inside this pitch-black space sat hundreds of horrifying instant photographs, organized in precise rows to document a years-long nightmare, the physical geography of Kansas City, Missouri. During the mid-1980s presented a stark contrast between affluent suburbs and gritty downtown corridors. Just south of the city center sat the historic Westport District, an eclectic neighborhood known for its bustling flea markets and transient artistic crowds. The streets here were lined with heavy brick buildings, glowing under amber sodium streetlights when the sun dipped below the horizon. At the heart of this local subculture operated a cramped novelty booth named Bob's Bizarre Bazaar, managed by a soft-spoken man named Bob Burdella. The aisles of his shop were cluttered with occult trinkets, antique oddities, and strange curiosities that drew a steady stream of fascinated patrons. Shoppers navigated tight pathways between shelves to reach the register, where Burdella waited with a welcoming demeanor. To the local community, he represented the quirky spirit of Westport, offering a safe haven for local youths who felt cast aside by society. He built a towering reputation as a compassionate mentor, a man who offered a hot meal or a listening ear to those in need. A mile away from the lively Westport market, Burdella resided in a large two-story home located at 4315 Charlotte Street. The house sat back from the cracked sidewalk, shadowed by mature oak trees that cast long obscuring shadows across the front porch. The exterior featured peeling white paint and heavy wooden window frames blending into the working-class neighborhood that surrounded it. Inside, the home was a maze of narrow hallways and densely packed rooms filled to the brim with the same strange artifacts sold at his bazaar. Berdella immersed himself in local affairs, even spearheading the neighborhood watch program to protect his street from petty thieves and vandals. He organized block parties, cooked massive vats of chili for his neighbors, and worked with local officials to clean up the community. No one suspected that the man advocating for neighborhood safety spent his evenings fortifying the heavy locks on his own solid wood doors. His crafted public persona functioned as a flawless shield against any passing suspicion. Underneath this generous facade, an intense, dark compulsion fermented behind the drawn curtains of his Charlotte Street home. Berdella sought out young, vulnerable men who drifted through the fringes of Kansas City, individuals battling severe addiction or extreme poverty. He understood the grim reality of the justice system, knowing how law enforcement viewed missing drifters and transient individuals. The rigid protocols of the Kansas City Police Department required mandatory waiting periods before investigating missing adults, a legal loophole Berdella exploited with precision. He knew that transient men possessed few family ties, meaning their sudden absence would generate no urgent inquiries or frantic searches. By embedding himself as a trusted figure among these forgotten populations, he gained direct access to the very people society had abandoned. He offered them temporary shelter, small sums of money, or a warm bed on the second floor of his massive house. They walked through his front door seeking basic human kindness, unaware that the heavy deadbolts clicking shut behind them signaled a permanent end to their freedom. The point of no return crystallized in the summer of 1984, when the merchant abandoned his public restraints and escalated his hidden desires. A young man named Jerry Howell vanished without a trace, leaving behind a profound void that authorities dismissed as a voluntary disappearance. Howell frequented the Westport flea market, drawn in by the eccentric atmosphere and the generous offers of assistance from the local shop owner. Berdella invited Howell back to the sprawling house on Charlotte Street, promising a safe environment and a brief respite from the harsh city streets. Once inside the dim faux chiot, the physical layout of the home worked against the unsuspecting guest, tapping him deep within the soundproofed interior walls. Berdella offered his guest a homemade drink, laced with a massive incapacitating dose of heavy animal tranquilizers procured from his various local connections. Within minutes, the powerful sedatives stripped Howell of his motor functions, causing him to collapse onto the hardwood floor. When he regained consciousness, the terrifying reality of his new existence snapped into focus. Howell awoke, immobilized, bound to a heavy wooden bed frame situated in a secluded room on the second floor of the house. The thick curtains remained drawn closed, blocking out the sun and disorienting his internal sense of time and space. Here, the true nightmare began as Berdella introduced an arsenal of terrifying instruments designed to inflict maximum physical anguish, to preserve the horror for his own later enjoyment. The predator retrieved a polaroid camera and a stack of lined notebook paper. He photographed Howell from multiple angles, capturing the stark terror in the young man's eyes as the agonizing ordeal stretched on. He logged every chemical administered, every shock applied, and every agonizing response, treating the suffering like a grim scientific experiment. The flash of the camera bulb illuminated the darkened room in intense bursts, burning the horrifying images onto the instant film. Howell endured this relentless torment for days, his desperate pleas bouncing uselessly against the thick insulated walls of the second-story trap, despite the horrific events unfolding just feet above the bustling sidewalk. The outside world remained oblivious to the terror inside 4315 Charlotte Street. Neighbors walked their dogs past the peeling white exterior, unaware of the muffled cries echoing through the upper floorboards. The systemic failure of the local authorities played a massive role in allowing this isolated tragedy to become a recurring pattern. When friends attempted to report Howell missing, indifferent desk sergeants cited his transient lifestyle as proof that he had moved on to another city. The lack of a formal investigation emboldened Berdella, providing him with a terrifying confirmation that he could act with absolute impunity. He realized that the marginalized status of his guests rendered them invisible to the very people sworn to protect them. The camera shutter clicked one final time on Howell, sealing his fate in a glossy square of film. The success of this horrific endeavor solidified a dark routine that would plague Kansas City for the next 4 years. Following the permanent disappearance of his first victim, Berdella transformed the second floor of his home into an inescapable chamber of suffering. Between 1984 and 1988, he lured at least 5 more young men into his web, employing the exact same deceptive tactics. Robert Sheldon, Mark Wallace, James Ferris, Todd Stoops, and Larry Pearson each walked up those heavy wooden porch steps seeking refuge or a meager paycheck. The physical layout of the upper room featured reinforced anchor points, thick restraints, and heavy locks on the single solid door. Downstairs, Berdella continued to host elaborate dinner parties, serving drinks and laughing with neighbors while his captives lay bound 15 feet above their heads. The psychological toll of hearing normal conversations drifting up through the floorboards broke the victim's hope of ever being rescued. They listened to the familiar sounds of passing traffic, distant sirens, and chirping cicadas isolated in a world that refused to look for them. Berdella moved between these two lives with ease, playing the role of the jovial neighborhood leader by day and the clinical tormentor by night. As the months bled into years, the Kansas City Police Department failed to connect the growing list of missing men from the Westport area. A distinct jurisdictional blind spot existed between the Vice Squad and the Missing Persons Unit, causing crucial pieces of information to slip through bureaucratic cracks. Officers dismissed reports filed by concerned friends, citing outdated policies that required proof of foul play before allocating dedicated investigative resources. If a young man had a history of petty theft or substance issues, his file was stamped and shoved into a dusty filing cabinet. This apathy gave Berdella an enormous operating window, allowing him to hold his victims captive for agonizing stretches of time, sometimes lasting up to 6 weeks. During these prolonged periods, the predator maintained detailed handwritten diaries, recording the specific voltages, chemical mixtures, and psychological torments inflicted on each helpless individual. He wrote with clinical precision, noting the exact times his victims drifted into unconsciousness and the precise moments they awoke. These notebooks, filled with meticulous cursive handwriting, sat hidden in plain sight, tucked away in a dark room located on the ground floor. The cruelty escalated as Berdella began experimenting with different classes of heavy animal tranquilizers, searching for a compound that would keep his victims compliant but conscious. He injected the captives in their vocal cords, swelling their throats to ensure they could not scream loud enough to alert the neighbors. He forced his prisoners to endure absolute darkness for days, only breaking the sensory deprivation with the blinding, disorienting flash of his Polaroid camera. By forcing the young men to look at photographs of previous victims, he unleashed a profound psychological attack that shattered any remaining will to survive. He wanted them to understand precisely what awaited them, stealing their future by showing them the undeniable proof of his past actions. The camera served as both a weapon of terror and an instrument of documentation, capturing hundreds of chilling images that chronicled the physical deterioration of the men. When a captive succumbed to the massive sustained trauma, Berdella wrapped them in heavy plastic bags. He then discarded their remains in local trash receptacles, trusting the city waste management system to erase his crimes. Despite his careful planning, a massive unheeded red flag emerged when a victim named Todd Stoops was held captive for an excruciating duration. Stoops suffered from horrific untreated infections resulting from his restraints, prompting Berdella to seek antibiotics from local associates. He told friends that he was treating a sick stray dog, an excuse that deflected any suspicion regarding the massive quantities of medical supplies he acquired. A simple follow-up by a curious neighbor or a routine wellness check by police could have shattered the deception and exposed the nightmare occurring on the second floor. Instead, the community implicitly trusted the leader of their neighborhood watch, ignoring the strange odors and muffled thuds emanating from the old house. The tragic absurdity of the situation peaked when local police officers visited the porch of 4315 Charlotte Street to discuss local vandalism issues. While they stood mere yards away from the dark room filled with horrific evidence, the officers thanked Berdella for his civic service and drove away. Stoops met a brutal permanent end, joining the forgotten ranks of men erased by a system designed to look the other way. Emboldened by his ongoing success and the profound incompetence of the local authorities, Berdella grew reckless in his daily operations. He expanded his collection of photographs, organizing them into thick binders that he reviewed for hours on end during his solitary evenings. The house itself became a terrifying museum of his actions, with the physical belongings of his victims scattered among the antique oddities he sold for a living. The distance between the front door and the second-floor stairwell measured barely 20 feet, yet it represented an insurmountable chasm for the men trapped above. He began leaving his captives bound for longer periods while he tended to his booth at the Westport Market, confident that the thick ropes and heavy sedatives would hold them. This growing arrogance eroded his attention to detail, leading him to make crucial errors in how he secured his final victim. The quiet residential block remained unaware that the heavy tension building inside the peeling White House was about to detonate. The constructed facade of the friendly Westport merchant was approaching its terrifying expiration date. The controlled terror unraveled during the first week of April 1988, shifting the balance of power inside the Charlotte Street house. A young man named Christopher Bryson, who had endured nearly a week of horrific psychological and physical torment, found himself unsupervised on the second floor. Berdella, displaying uncharacteristic carelessness, had left the residence to run errands, trusting that the heavy restraints and intense sedatives would keep his captive docile. As the silence of the empty house settled around him, Bryson realized this narrow window represented his only conceivable chance at survival. Fighting through severe chemical haze and agonizing physical pain, he twisted his battered wrists against the bindings. He loosened the thick rope securing him to the bed frame, inching his hands toward freedom. The heavy leather dog collar remained fastened around his neck, but his hands slipped free from their restraints. Panic and adrenaline surged through his veins as he stumbled toward the single window, praying the aged wooden latch would give way. Bryson threw open the heavy sash, peering down at the frightening drop to the concrete driveway waiting 20 feet below. Without a second thought, he launched his body through the opening, crashing onto the hard pavement and tearing the skin from his knees. Gasping for air and exposed to the elements, he scrambled to his feet and sprinted toward the nearest cross street. A passing neighbor, sitting in a parked truck at the corner, stared in absolute shock as the battered man threw himself against the passenger side door. Bryson begged for help, clutching the heavy metal ring of the dog collar and pointing back toward the imposing White House on the hill. The neighbor sped away from the area in a sheer panic, rushing Bryson to a nearby police station. A team of stunned detectives listened to his horrifying account of the chamber hidden above the lively neighborhood. Initially skeptical of the bizarre story, the commanding officers dispatched a heavily armed tactical unit to secure the perimeter of 4315 Charlotte Street. When police breached the heavy wooden doors of the residence, the true scale of the unseen horror crashed down upon them. They navigated the tight, cluttered hallways, locating the second-floor room exactly as Bryson had described, complete with heavy chains and torn ropes. However, the most chilling discovery waited on the ground floor, hidden away in a small pitch-black dark room tucked beneath the main staircase. Detectives uncovered several thick binders containing over 200 pristine full-color Polaroid photographs, documenting the agonizing final days of the missing men. Beside the photo albums sat the terrifying torture diaries, filled with neat cursive handwriting detailing the exact voltages, chemicals, and psychological tactics used on the captives. The stark, undeniable reality of the visual evidence shattered the quiet neighborhood, exposing the beloved block captain as a prolific monster hiding in plain sight. An extensive excavation of the overgrown backyard yielded a grim discovery as investigators unearthed the hidden remains of the missing men buried just inches beneath the dirt. The reign of terror had ended thanks to the desperate gravity-defying leap of a single resilient survivor. Faced with an overwhelming mountain of photographic and written evidence of his own making, the facade of the friendly neighborhood merchant evaporated. Berdella was taken into custody, and the local community watched in horrified disbelief as investigators hauled endless boxes of grim evidence from his front porch. The glaring failure of the local missing persons unit became a massive local scandal, forcing the department to rewrite their rigid protocols regarding transient individuals. Families of the victims who had been ignored and dismissed by desk sergeants for years received the devastating confirmation they had long dreaded. The detailed journals provided an exact timeline of the disappearances, leaving no room for the defense to argue any alternate theories of the crimes. The sheer volume of visual documentation meant prosecutors did not have to rely on circumstantial evidence. The camera had captured the absolute, unvarnished truth of the hidden atrocities. The man who had used photography to terrorize his victims now found himself trapped by the very images he created. To avoid the terrifying prospect of a mandatory death penalty, Berdella chose to cooperate with the prosecutor, outlining the precise details of his actions. In a guarded Missouri courtroom, he stood before a judge and pleaded guilty to 1 count of first-degree and 1 count of second-degree offenses. The judge handed down a decisive permanent sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole, ensuring he would never walk the streets of Westport again. He was remanded to the Missouri State Penitentiary, stripped of his power, his bizarre collections, and his carefully curated public persona. His time behind bars was short-lived as the heavy toll of prison life impacted his physical health. In October 1992, just 4 years after his dramatic arrest, Berdella collapsed in sudden pain. He died of a massive heart attack locked inside his cell. His sudden passing brought a permanent, unceremonious end to his dark legacy. The imposing White House on Charlotte Street was demolished, leaving behind an empty dirt lot that served as a quiet memorial to the men who vanished there. The haunting Polaroid photographs remained locked away in deep police archives, a permanent testament to the horrific power of a camera in the wrong hands. While this case concluded with a definitive, concrete resolution behind steel bars, other photographic mysteries lack such clear endings. Thousands of miles away, a distant community was about to be shattered by a single instant photo left discarded in a public parking space. The unseen perpetrators in this next case operated without the cover of a permanent house or a trusted public persona. They vanished into the sprawling American highway system, leaving behind a terrifying visual clue that continues to baffle law enforcement decades later. In the summer of 1989, a woman walking out of a Florida convenience store made a grim discovery on the sun-baked asphalt. Her fateful glance toward the pavement would launch one of the most perplexing visual mysteries in American history. June 1989, in a convenience store parking lot in Port St. Joe. Florida, a woman approaches a parking space recently vacated by a windowless white Toyota cargo van. She notices a small Polaroid photograph lying face down on the asphalt. She turns it over to discover a chilling, full-color image of a bound teenage girl and a young boy. Thick duct tape covers their mouths as they stare helplessly into the camera lens. Rewind the timeline to the autumn of 1988. Belen, New Mexico, sits 35 miles south of Albuquerque. The town features low-slung adobe buildings, wide avenues, and a backdrop of rugged desert mountains. Heat radiates from the asphalt roads during the peak of the day. 19-year-old Tara Calico lives here with her mother. She attends the University of New Mexico and works a steady job as a local bank teller. Ambition drives her daily routine. She balances her studies, her work schedule, and a strict physical fitness regimen. She plays tennis, runs, and rides her bicycle across the vast desert landscapes. She represents the quintessential portrait of a dedicated young woman building her future. Her favorite exercise route stretches along New Mexico State Road 47. This two-lane highway cuts through sparse vegetation, scattered residential lots, and long, empty stretches of dirt shoulders. Railroad tracks run parallel to the highway in several sections, creating a physical barrier on the western side. Deep irrigation ditches line the eastern edge. A rider out here finds almost zero shade and long gaps between inhabited structures. Tara knows every crack in the pavement along this familiar path. She rides a bright neon pink, Huffy mountain bike with yellow control cables. The vibrant colors make her highly visible against the muted browns of the desert terrain. She carries her portable cassette player on every journey. Music provides an upbeat soundtrack to the grueling miles under the high-altitude sun. The morning of September 20th, 1988, begins just like any other Tuesday. Tara steps out of her front door at 9:30 in the morning. She plans to complete a 36-mile loop down State Road 47 and back. She expects the ride to take her around 2 hours. Before clipping into her pedals, she asks her mother to come get her if she does not return by noon. She has a midday tennis match scheduled with her boyfriend and refuses to be late. The screen door slams shut behind her. The tires of her pink mountain bike crunch over the gravel driveway. She turns onto the main road and begins her southbound journey. The desert swallows her silhouette as the morning sun climbs higher into the sky. Noon arrives and passes without a single sign of the young woman. Her mother paces the living room floor before grabbing her car keys. She drives the exact route her daughter took, scanning the desolate highway edges. The dust blows across the empty two-lane road. No bright pink bicycle appears on the horizon. By mid-afternoon, the family alerts the Valencia County Sheriff Office. Deputies initiate a roadside search along the 36-mile stretch. A mile from the Calico home, investigators make a grim discovery. Pieces of a shattered portable cassette player lie scattered in the dirt next to the asphalt. A broken cassette tape featuring the band Boston rests in the brush nearby. A closer inspection of the dirt shoulder reveals subtle disturbances in the soil. Deputies find bicycle tire tracks veering sharply off the pavement. The treads match the exact pattern of a Huffy mountain bike. No skid marks from a vehicle exist on the asphalt next to the tracks. The physical evidence paints a chilling picture of an abrupt, forced stop. The geographic isolation of the spot meant no witnesses stood close enough to hear a struggle. Law enforcement locks down the area and bags the broken cassette player. The plastic shards show fresh impact damage, suggesting it hit the ground with immense force. The sun sets over Belen, casting long, dark shadows over the empty highway. Tara is gone, leaving behind only shattered plastic and a profound void. The sunrise on September 21st brings a massive influx of search volunteers. Deputies knock on doors across the scattered residential tracts lining State Road 47. A timeline begins to form from fragmented witness accounts. Several commuters report seeing Tara riding south at 11:45 in the morning. These drivers also note a specific, unsettling detail trailing just behind her. A light-colored Ford pickup truck with a camper shell followed her bicycle at a crawl. The distance between the truck bumper and the rear tire of the bicycle measured less than 10 feet. The driver made no attempt to pass her on the empty road. Investigators broadcast the vehicle description across all regional police frequencies. The search yields 0 matches, plunging the investigation into an immediate, frustrating standstill. The passing days expose a rigid bureaucratic nightmare between law enforcement agencies. The Valencia County Sheriff Office lacks the manpower to conduct a sprawling interstate investigation. The Belen Police Department holds no jurisdiction outside the immediate city limits. Federal Bureau of Investigation protocols require concrete evidence of a kidnapping across state lines before agents can assume command. The broken cassette player fails to meet this strict evidentiary threshold. Detectives must rely on local resources, handwriting reports on carbon paper and mailing physical bulletins to neighboring counties. This slow communication method gives the predator a massive head start. Vital days slip away while paperwork moves at a glacial pace through the administrative channels. The system meant to protect citizens instead provides a wide, unmonitored escape corridor for a monster. The Calico family watches in despair as the official momentum grinds to a halt. Autumn fades into the bitter cold of a New Mexico winter. Detectives spend November and December chasing ghosts across the desert. A local man becomes a person of interest after neighbors report erratic behavior. Officers attain a search warrant and tear up his backyard looking for a clandestine grave. The excavation turns up nothing but hard-packed clay and rusted pipes. December shifts into January of 1989, and the case file grows cold. The lack of a crime scene denies forensic technicians any chance to collect fingerprints or genetic material. Investigators return to the highway, shoulder, walking the route over and over. The wind erases the tire tracks and buries the last remnants of the struggle under layers of sand. Silence envelops the case for the entire spring season. June 15, 1989, shatters this prolonged silence. 1,000 miles away in Port St. Joe, Florida, a woman finds the aforementioned Polaroid photograph in a convenience store parking lot. Local Florida police process the image and recoil at the raw terror captured on the film. The picture shows a cramped, windowless space lined with dark blankets. A teenage girl and a younger boy lay bound on the floor with thick tape across their mouths. A popular paperback thriller by Virginia Andrews rests next to the girl. The Florida investigators run the image through a national missing persons database. A sharp-eyed analyst notes a resemblance to the flyer of a missing 19-year-old from New Mexico. Authorities package the photograph and send it on a direct flight to Albuquerque. The discovery bridges a massive geographical divide and reunites the dormant investigation. Tara S. mother sits in a sterile interrogation room to view the photograph. She stares at the bound girl and immediately recognizes a specific scar on the right leg. Tara received this exact same injury during a childhood car accident. The mother also points out the paperback thriller, noting it as her daughter's favorite author. The Valencia County Sheriff Office contacts the Federal Bureau of Investigation, finally meeting the threshold for federal intervention. Agents descend on Belen and initiate a massive multi-state coordination effort. They seek to identify the young boy in the photo, hoping a second missing persons case will provide a geographical link. Initial theories suggest the boy is Michael Henley, a child who vanished in New Mexico earlier that year. The case transforms from a local mystery into a national obsession broadcast on television screens across the country. The captor forces his victims to endure unimaginable psychological torment, documenting their despair on film. The Federal Bureau of Investigation sends the Polaroid to their specialized imaging laboratory in Washington. Technicians attempt to enhance the background details to identify the make and model of the van. The dark blankets obscure any defining structural features of the vehicle interior. The agency brings in analysts from Scotland Yard to conduct independent facial recognition tests. The British authorities conclude the girl in the photograph is indeed Tara Calico. The American federal agents issue a conflicting report, stating the image lacks sufficient resolution for a definitive match. This discrepancy creates a massive roadblock for prosecutors demanding absolute certainty. Investigators trace the batch number on the Polaroid film cartridge. The manufacturer confirms the film hit store shelves in May of 1989, proving the picture is a recent creation. The captor kept his victims alive for at least 9 months, prolonging their nightmare in total secrecy. The net tightens. Law enforcement floods the coastal streets of Port St. Joe. Officers search every commercial parking lot. Troopers set up roadblocks on the major outbound highways. Detectives inspect hundreds of white cargo vans matching the witness description. The driver anticipates the massive dragnet. He alters his escape route to avoid main thoroughfares. The windowless Toyota cargo van slips through the loose perimeter. The predator vanishes into the humid expanse of the Florida Panhandle. He leaves nothing but exhaust fumes and a terrifying photograph behind. The full horror of the situation crystallizes. The captor hides in plain sight. He drives a common vehicle down public interstates. He stops at public convenience stores. He keeps his victims bound mere feet away from unaware citizens. The walls of the van muffle their desperate screams. The thick tape guarantees their silence. The camera flash captures their profound isolation in a crowded world. The captor possesses total control over their reality. He extinguishes their future without leaving a single piece of physical trace evidence. Decades pass without a single arrest in the disappearance of Tara Calico. The young boy in the photograph is later determined not to be Michael Henley, adding another layer of unresolved mystery. The Federal Bureau of Investigation scales back the active hunt as leads evaporate. Tara remains officially listed as a missing person. No physical remains ever surface in the New Mexico desert or the Florida swamps. The Calico family endures a lifetime of agonizing unanswered questions. Her mother passes away, never knowing the definitive fate of her vibrant daughter. The system fails to deliver even a fraction of justice. The case file gathers dust in a secure archive room. The Polaroid photograph remains a haunting artifact of pure evil. In recent years, local law enforcement initiates fresh reviews of the cold case. Detectives claim to possess circumstantial evidence pointing to 2 local men who allegedly harassed Tara on her bicycle ride. These rumors suggest a panicked cover-up after a vehicular collision on the highway. However, the district attorney refuses to file formal charges. The rigid legal standard requires a body or a definitive crime scene to prove a life met a brutal, permanent end. The lack of concrete physical evidence provides a permanent shield for the guilty. A legal loophole allows suspects to walk free if they dispose of a victim thoroughly enough. The ghost of Tara Calico still haunts the dirt shoulders of State Road 47. While her captor evaded justice through sheer anonymity, other monsters chose to record their atrocities on audio, sealing their own doom. In the fall of 1979, an informant hands police a cassette tape that exposes the unimaginable cruelty of a man named Roy Norris. In the crisp autumn air of late 1979, a terrified informant walked into a Southern California police precinct with a tip that defied all rational belief. He spoke of an abducted teenager named Shirley Ledford and a horrifying audio cassette capturing her final desperate screams. Detectives listened in stunned silence as the informant described a rolling torture chamber hidden inside a customized silver van. This single whispered confession provided the exact key needed to dismantle a sadistic duo prowling the Pacific Coast Highway. Before the sun set that day, investigators prepared to pry open the steel doors of a nightmare. The sun beat down relentlessly on the concrete yard of the California Men's Colony in San Luis Obispo during the mid-1970s. Behind these towering fences and coiled razor wire, the state housed some of its most dangerous offenders. It was within this bleak coastal fortress that Roy Norris crossed paths with Lawrence Bittaker. The two inmates quickly formed a deeply disturbing alliance built entirely on a shared obsession with extreme violence and absolute control. Prison psychologists and evaluators dutifully documented their antisocial behaviors and troubling fantasies over several years. The systemic failure began when the state parole board blatantly ignored these glaring red flags. Both men possessed extensive criminal histories involving severe assaults on vulnerable victims. Despite explicit warnings from frontline staff regarding their volatile natures, rigid bureaucratic checklists prioritized prison population control over public safety. State officials stamped their release papers and set two dangerous predators loose onto the unsuspecting streets of Southern California. Upon securing their freedom in the late 1970s, the newly released men settled into the sprawling urban grid of Los Angeles. They pooled their meager resources to purchase a 1977 GM cargo van. From the outside, the vehicle looked entirely unremarkable, blending perfectly into the heavy traffic rolling along the Pacific Coast Highway. Inside, however, Bittaker and Norris meticulously transformed the empty steel shell into a mobile nightmare. They stripped out the factory interior and installed heavy wooden paneling across the metal walls and ceiling. To ensure absolute silence, they packed dense acoustic insulation behind every panel and blacked out the rear windows entirely. They bolted a bed to the floor and stocked the surrounding cabinets with heavy mechanical tools, ropes, and chains purchased from local hardware stores. The men proudly nicknamed their creation Murder Mac, treating it as a twisted sanctuary for their impending plans. This rolling trap allowed them to seamlessly navigate crowded beaches and quiet suburban streets without ever drawing a second glance from local patrols. The sun-drenched stretches of the Pacific Coast Highway in 1979 represented freedom and adventure for countless young hitchhikers. The asphalt wound along the jagged California coastline, connecting sleepy beach towns to the bustling heart of Los Angeles. Over a terrifying 5-month period, this scenic corridor transformed into a hunting ground for Norris and Bittaker. The men established a rigid routine, cruising the winding coastal roads for hours at a time while scanning the shoulders for isolated targets. They specifically looked for young, trusting teenagers standing alone near sandy turnoffs or bus stops. When they spotted a vulnerable individual, they would pull the heavy silver van smoothly onto the gravel shoulder. One of the men typically approached with a warm, disarming smile and an offer of a safe ride down the coast. The heavy sliding door would open with a loud metallic scrape, revealing a seemingly harmless interior to the unsuspecting passenger. The moment the victim stepped inside, the door slammed shut on its tracks, instantly sealing their fate behind soundproofed walls. Inside the suffocating darkness of the moving van, the true nature of the duo immediately revealed itself. The men utilized the heavy mechanical tools stored in their side cabinets to systematically break the will of their captives. The perpetrators subjected 5 teenage girls to unimaginable emotional and physical torment as the van rolled anonymously down public highways. To preserve their twisted memories of control, Bittaker and Norris introduced cheap cassette recorders and Polaroid cameras into their dark routine. They forced their victims into deeply degrading scenarios, documenting every horrific moment through the cold lens of a camera. The bright flashbulbs illuminated the tight, wood-paneled space, capturing expressions of sheer terror that the men would later review for their own amusement. The magnetic tape of the cassette recorders captured the agonizing pleas and desperate bargains made by the trapped teenagers. This calculated documentation served no purpose other than fueling the immense psychological depravity shared by the two former inmates. Every photograph and recording permanently etched the tragic reality of their actions into physical evidence that would eventually seal their doom. The sprawling wilderness of the San Gabriel Mountains rises sharply behind the Los Angeles basin, creating a vast and rugged barrier of deep canyons and thick brush. It was within this unforgiving terrain that the terrifying aftermath of the abductions first came to light. Hikers navigating steep dirt trails began making grim discoveries hidden among the dense pine trees and rocky ravines. Local deputies secured the remote crime scenes, carefully stringing yellow tape across dusty paths while awaiting evidence technicians. The rough topography made the recovery efforts incredibly difficult, forcing officers to carry heavy equipment on foot-up steep inclines. Investigators stood over the tragic scenes, desperately searching the dry earth for tire tracks or a stray footprint. Without the modern benefit of cellular tracking or advanced genetic profiling, the detectives found themselves staring at absolute dead ends. The sheer vastness of the mountain range severely hindered their ability to map a coherent pattern of disposal. The Southern California police departments remained entirely fragmented, failing to connect these mountain discoveries to the missing person reports filed miles away along the coast. This critical lack of communication between neighboring jurisdictions provided the predators with a massive unseen advantage. Detectives in the beach towns treated the missing teenagers as simple runaways, dutifully filling out missing persons paperwork and filing it away in crowded metal cabinets. Meanwhile, the homicide detectives working the mountain recoveries operated in a complete informational vacuum. They lacked any unified database to cross-reference the physical descriptions of the victims with the runaway reports sitting just a few towns over. A rigid protocol required physical paper copies to be mailed between precincts, a sluggish process that severely delayed the sharing of vital clues. Detectives worked grueling 12-hour shifts, manually flipping through thick binders of teletypes without finding a single match. The state crime laboratories faced a massive backlog, and their available forensic tools could only provide basic blood typing. The perpetrators had left almost no trace evidence at the outdoor scenes, heavily relying on the natural decomposition caused by the harsh mountain elements, while the detectives chased phantom leads and exhausted their resources. The silver van continued its silent patrol along the coastal highway. The tragic climax of this unseen spree occurred in late October of 1979 when Shirley Ledford accepted a ride near a busy intersection. The 16-year-old stepped into the cargo van, completely unaware of the soundproofed horrors waiting behind the driver's seat. As the vehicle navigated the busy evening traffic of Los Angeles, the two men initiated their most documented and brutal attack. They activated a portable cassette recorder, capturing every agonizing moment of her desperate struggle against the heavy tools they wielded. The audio tape captured her continuous pleas for mercy, contrasting sharply against the chilling, casual conversation of her attackers. The men displayed a profound level of emotional detachment, treating the horrific ordeal as nothing more than a routine task. They eventually ended her suffering and carelessly discarded her remains in a residential neighborhood, breaking their pattern of mountain disposals. This sudden shift in location confused investigators even further, adding a completely new jurisdiction to the already tangled web of unsolved cases. The terrifying audio recording of the ordeal remained safely hidden in Bitker's bedroom, serving as a dark trophy of their escalating violence. The impenetrable wall of silence maintained by the duo finally cracked due to an overwhelming sense of twisted pride. In early November of 1979, Roy Norris met with a former prison associate to catch up on old times. The two men sat in a smoky, dimly lit bar in a Los Angeles suburb. nursing cheap beers as the evening dragged on. Norris simply could not contain his desperate need to boast about the immense power he had exerted over the missing girls. Leaning across the sticky wooden table, he lowered his voice and began detailing the exact methods they used inside the silver van. He specifically mentioned the custom soundproofing, the brutal application of mechanics' tools, and the horrific audio cassette involving Shirley Ledford. The former cellmate sat in stunned silence, his blood running cold as Norris casually described the disposal locations in the mountains. Despite his own extensive criminal background, the associate found the sheer depravity of the confession absolutely sickening. The moment Norris left the bar, the associate made a life-altering decision to break the unspoken code of the streets and contact the authorities. The informant walked into a local police precinct the very next morning, demanding to speak directly with a homicide detective. He sat rigidly in a cramped, windowless interview room, nervously tapping his fingers against a battered metal table. When the lead investigators finally arrived, the informant relayed every gruesome detail Norris had whispered the night before. Detectives initially viewed the tip with deep skepticism, well aware that jailhouse informants often fabricated stories to secure favorable treatment. However, the specific mention of the mountain terrain and the precise condition of the recovered victims perfectly matched withheld crime scene data. The informant provided the exact make and model of the silver vehicle, along with the home addresses of both men. Realizing they finally had a concrete lead, a massive surveillance operation was immediately authorized by the district attorney. Plainclothes officers parked unmarked Sians near the residences, watching through binoculars as the two suspects went about their daily routines. The net was quietly closing around the perpetrators, setting the stage for a highly coordinated and overwhelming tactical strike. The tactical strike launched in late November of 1979 with absolute precision. Heavily armed police officers silently surrounded the targeted locations before the sun even rose. Radios crackled with short, sharp commands across the secure channels. Tactical teams breached the residential doors simultaneously, catching the suspects completely off guard. Norris dropped his hands and surrendered without putting up a single fight. Bittaker stood frozen in the hallway, shocked by the sudden invasion of his home. Detectives immediately located the silver van parked quietly in the front driveway. Crime scene, technicians secured the heavy metal doors with bright red evidence tape. The predators were finally separated, heavily shackled, and thrown into the back of waiting patrol cruisers. The interrogation room felt suffocating as Norris stared blankly at the bare concrete walls. Detectives slammed a massive folder of surveillance logs onto the cold steel table. They laid out the informant testimony word for word, destroying any chance of an alibi. Norris instantly realized the overwhelming weight of the evidence crushing down upon him. He cowardly turned state's evidence, betraying his partner in a desperate bid to save his own life. He agreed to guide investigators directly to the remaining shallow graves hidden deep within the San Gabriel Mountains. Meanwhile, a separate team of searchers completely dismantled Bicker's residence in search of physical proof. Investigators pried open a locked box hidden carefully inside a dark bedroom closet. They discovered a horrific collection of Polaroid photographs and the dreaded audio cassettes, definitively proving the duo had recorded every single atrocious act. The judicial process that followed the arrests showcased the grim reality of the plea bargain system. Roy Norris officially pleaded guilty to multiple severe charges in a packed Los Angeles courtroom in exchange for his detailed testimony against his former partner. The presiding judge handed Norris a sentence of 45 years to life in prison. The families of the victims sat in the gallery, forced to watch the cooperative predator avoid the ultimate punishment. Lawrence Bittnaker faced a grueling trial where the horrific audio recordings were played loudly for the jury. The devastating auditory evidence left seasoned jurors weeping and completely sealed his fate. The jury swiftly found Bitker guilty on all counts, and the judge officially sentenced him to death. The state transferred both men into maximum security facilities, permanently removing them from the coastal highways they had terrorized. The silver van was eventually crushed into a cube of scrap metal, erasing the physical torture chamber from existence. The passage of time eventually delivered the final inescapable verdict that the justice system had delayed for decades. Lawrence Bitker spent 40 long years languishing in a tiny cell on California's infamous death row. He managed to evade the execution chamber through endless legal appeals, ultimately dying of natural causes in December of 2019. Roy Norris remained locked behind the towering walls of a state penitentiary, heavily despised by both guards and fellow inmates. Just a few months after his former partner perished, Norris also died of natural causes in early 2020. Their permanent removal from society offered a small measure of cold comfort to the grieving families left behind. The absolute horror they captured on tape remains locked away in police vaults, completely inaccessible to the public. The terrifying reality of predators hiding behind the badge of authority is a nightmare all its own. In fact, a heavily wooded area in Florida would soon reveal exactly how far a uniformed officer could go when trusted with absolute power over the innocent. The suffocating July heat of 1972 pressed down on the dense Florida swamps as two desperate teenage girls tore through the sharp sawgrass. Their wrists bore the raw friction burns of taut nylon rope. They had just escaped the unyielding trunk of a mangrove tree where a uniformed law enforcement officer had bound them and promised to return. They flagged down a passing motorist, their lungs burning as they gasped out a desperate warning. The man who had driven them into the isolated wilderness was not a rogue drifter, but a sworn deputy of the local sheriff department. Martin County, Florida, in the early 1970s, felt like a quiet coastal haven insulated from the chaos of larger cities. The scent of salt air mixed with the heavy humidity, and the community trusted the uniformed officers who patrolled the two-lane highways. Gerard Schaefer wore the brown and tan uniform of a Martin County Sheriff deputy. He carried the heavy metallic badge, the standard-issue service weapon, and the absolute authority that came with his patrol cruiser. He presented himself as a strict-by-the-book guardian of the local youth. Schaefer patrolled the beaches and remote stretches of asphalt. Watching the young men and women who gathered after dusk, residents saw a vigilant public servant keeping their streets orderly behind the dashboard of his cruiser. A deep, unrecognized darkness guided his daily patrols. Schaefer viewed his badge not as a shield for the innocent, but as a skeleton key to access the vulnerable. A glaring breakdown in departmental vetting placed that badge on his chest. Before arriving in Martin County, Schaefer served briefly as an officer in the nearby municipality of Wilton Manors. His superiors there documented his inappropriate behavior, noting his disturbing fixation on female civilians and his erratic shifts in temperament. They terminated his employment, pushing him out of their jurisdiction to protect their own department liability. The termination paperwork sat in a closed file drawer unshelled with neighboring counties. The Martin County Sheriff Office needed bodies to fill patrol shifts and conducted a superficial background check. They failed to place a single telephone call to the Wilton Manors police chief. This administrative negligence handed a recognized predator a fresh uniform, a weapon, and an unblemished slate. The residents of Martin County unknowingly funded the daily operations of a man active in plotting their ruin. Susan Place was 17 years old, and Georgia Jessup was 16 years old. Two close friends navigating the transitions of adolescence in southern Florida. Susan had a bright, trusting demeanor, often spending her afternoons listening to records or walking the sun-baked sidewalks near her home. Georgia shared her adventurous spirit. and the two girls spent countless hours talking about their futures under the hum of the sodium streetlights. Their families maintained typical working-class routines, relying on the inherent safety of their quiet neighborhoods. The girls trusted authority figures, having been raised to seek out a uniform whenever they found themselves in distress. They carried no apprehension when a marked patrol car rolled past their favorite local spots. Schaefer learned their routines, noting the exact distances between their homes and the isolated stretches of highway he patrolled. He mapped out the geographical blind spots of the county, specifically tracking the desolate dirt access roads that branched off into the deep marshlands. The absolute collapse of the local illusion of safety began on July 21, 1972. Schaefer spotted two different teenage girls hitchhiking along a coastal highway and activated his red and blue emergency lights. He offered them a ride, leveraging the inherent trust commanded by his official county vehicle. Instead of driving them to their destination, he turned his cruiser down a narrow, overgrown dirt path leading into the remote Hutchinson Island wetlands. He drove exactly 2 miles past the main paved road, isolating the girls from any passing traffic. Once the vehicle stopped, the facade of the helpful public servant vanished entirely. Schaefer drew his heavy service weapon and forced the terrified girls out into the suffocating humidity. He marched them through the thick brush, securing them tightly to the roots of a massive mangrove tree. He documented their terror with a handheld camera, capturing their bound state before temporarily leaving the immediate area. During his brief absence, the two girls executed a frantic bid for survival, twisting their wrists until the skin peeled away. They broke free from the unyielding roots and scrambled blindly through the dense vegetation until they reached the main road. The local police department took Schaefer into custody based on their detailed report. The legal system then provided the predator with a simple, devastating advantage. A local judge set his bail at a highly accessible amount, treating the abduction as a standard felony rather than an indicator of severe predatory behavior. Schaefer posted the required funds and walked out of the county holding facility the very next day. He returned to the community unsupervised, his mind racing with the realization that he needed to refine his methods. The judicial oversight left a disgraced, vengeful former deputy walking the same streets as the young women he had been studying. On September 27, 1972, Susan Place and Georgia Jessup stepped out into the warm evening air. They told their families they were going out to enjoy the local nightlife and would return before the late hours. The two girls vanished into the Florida night, leaving behind no immediate physical clues or witnesses. Their families dialed the local precinct, expecting an immediate and robust response to locate their missing daughters. The intake officers took the missing persons reports but classified the teenage girls as voluntary runaways. This administrative categorization halted any immediate forensic search of the local environment. No search parties combed the dirt roads, and no alerts broadcast across the regional police radio frequencies. The girls were simply erased from the community, their absence minimized by the very department that had previously employed their captor. The immediate days following the disappearance of Susan and Georgia saw zero organized momentum from local law enforcement. Investigators filed the runaway reports in overflowing metal cabinets, telling the panicked parents to wait by their telephones. The Place and Jessup families conducted their own searches, driving slow routes through the dark streets and asking local business owners for any sighting. They hung handwritten flyers on wooden utility poles, fighting against the suffocating silence of the police department. During this critical window, crucial physical evidence out in the swamplands degraded under the heavy Florida rains and extreme heat. Detectives ignored a vital tip from a local gas station attendant who reported seeing a man matching the description of Schaefer purchasing suspicious amounts of supplies. This early failure to connect the active missing persons cases with the recently disgraced deputy gave the perpetrator complete freedom of movement. Schaefer utilized this unregulated time to conceal his activities, burying the reality of his actions deep within the Hutchinson Island mangroves. The local court finally mandated Schaefer to stand trial for the July abduction of the first 2 girls in December 1972. Investigators focused exclusively on building that specific case, blind to the larger pattern of vanishing youth in their own jurisdiction. Schaefer confidently presented a fabricated narrative to his defense attorneys, claiming he had only tied the 2 girls to the tree as a misguided demonstration of the dangers of hitchhiking. He produced a series of character reference letters written by individuals unaware of his violent compulsions. The prosecution dismantled this absurd defense, relying heavily on the physical friction burns still visible on the victims. The court found Schaefer guilty of aggravated assault, successfully removing him from the general public. He transferred to the county holding facility to await his formal sentencing, while the files for Susan and Georgia remained inactive. The investigators closed their notebooks on Schaefer, believing they had neatly tied up his single isolated incident of misconduct. The scope of the investigation drastically shifted when detectives began preparing the final paperwork for his sentencing phase. A meticulous property room clerk cross-referenced items found in the trunk of the patrol vehicle Schaefer used during the initial July abduction. The clerk noticed several pieces of inexpensive jewelry that did not belong to the 2 girls from the July case. Recognizing a serious discrepancy, lead detectives secured a broad search warrant for the primary residence of the Schaefer family. Investigators drove out to the suburban home of the mother of Gerard Schaefer and breached the front door. They tore through his childhood bedroom, shining heavy flashlights into the dark corners of his closets. Inside a locked wooden footlocker, detectives made a grim discovery that permanently altered the trajectory of the case. They uncovered a collection of gold chains, rings, and an assortment of driver licenses belonging to multiple missing women from across the state. The physical search of the bedroom yielded far more than stolen jewelry and identification cards. Detectives pulled out several thick handwritten manuscripts bound in frayed leather covers. Schaefer had documented his violent fantasies in hundreds of pages of text, titling the collection Killer Fiction. The writing detailed exact step-by-step methods of capturing, restraining, and silencing young women in remote woodland environments. The investigators read the pages in stunned silence, realizing the text matched the geographical layout of Martin County with terrifying precision. Beneath the manuscripts, they found a small black camera and several developed Polaroid photographs hidden inside a hollowed-out book. The images depicted young women bound terrified and hidden away in the dense mangrove swamps. Detectives recognized the faces in the photographs as Susan Place and Georgia Jessup, capturing the girls in their final moments of agonizing captivity. The discovery of the photographs forced the department to abandon their runaway theory regarding Susan and Georgia. The physical background of the Polaroid pictures showed very specific root structures and a distinct pattern of coastal vegetation. A local botanist reviewed the images and identified the flora as exclusively native to the remote eastern shores of Hutchinson Island. Law enforcement mobilized a massive grid search, dispatching dozens of deputies, tracking dogs, and forensic specialists to the exact 2-mile stretch of dirt road Schaefer previously patrolled. The search teams waded through waist-deep, stagnant swamp water, battling intense swarms of insects and venomous snakes. They carried heavy steel probing rods, sinking the metal deep into the soft, muddy earth. The physical geography of the island worked against them, as the dense roots created a nearly impenetrable barrier over the soil. The investigators mapped out a massive search radius, focusing their efforts specifically on areas shielded from the main road by thick canopies of trees. The initial week of the swamp search resulted in a crushing dead end for the wary investigators. The probing rods struck multiple buried objects, but excavation teams only unearthed discarded fishing gear rusted car parts, and ancient animal remains. The defense attorney for Schaefer immediately filed an injunction, arguing the search was a baseless fishing expedition designed to harass his client before sentencing. The judge nearly halted the operation, demanding concrete proof that the photographs were recent and not staged theatrical props. Detectives scrambled to contact the manufacturer of the Polaroid film, checking the serial numbers printed on the back of the physical photographs. The company provided a definitive manufacturing date, proving the film was produced in August 1972, explicitly placing the creation of the images right at the time the girls vanished. The judge granted an emergency extension, allowing the search teams to push further into the deepest, darkest sections of the mangrove forest. On a humid afternoon in April 1973, a tracking dog stopped at the base of an ancient twisted mangrove tree. The animal began pawing at a patch of disturbed earth located roughly 300 yards off the hidden dirt path. Forensic anthropologists moved in with small hand trowels and soft bristle brushes, peeling back the layers of wet soil and decaying leaves. 2 feet below the surface, the metal tools scraped against something separate from the tangled roots. The investigators cleared the dirt to reveal the hidden tragedy of Susan Place and Georgia Jessup. The 2 young women had met a brutal permanent end in the complete isolation of the island. The physical condition of the site confirmed the horrific reality detailed in the recovered manuscripts. Schaefer had forced the girls to endure profound psychological terror, isolating them from the world they knew before stealing their futures. The forensic recovery team transported the findings back to the county medical examiner for definitive identification. Dental records formally matched the recovered evidence to the 2 missing teenagers, shattering the final, lingering hopes of their families. Detectives laid the items found in the locked footlocker next to the forensic reports on a large metal table. A distinct gold ring previously identified by the mother of Susan Place sat directly beside the Polaroid photographs of her daughter in captivity. The pieces of the puzzle locked together with devastating clarity. The uniformed deputy who was sworn to protect the county had utilized his badge to hunt the most vulnerable members of his own community. He had filmed his actions to preserve the immense power he felt, creating a permanent visual record of his unfathomable cruelty. The state of Florida officially indicted Gerard Schaefer on 2 counts of capital offenses for the tragic loss of Susan Place and Georgia Jessup. In the fall of 1973, the prosecution presented the devastating combination of his written confessions, the physical trophies, and the horrifying photographs. The defense attempted to argue that the writings were purely fictional and the evidence circumstantial. But the visual reality of the Polaroids destroyed any possibility of reasonable doubt. The jury deliberated for a short period before returning guilty verdicts on all charges. The judge sentenced the former deputy to serve 2 concurrent life terms inside the Florida state prison system. The families of the victims endured the agonizing reality of the trial, finding small solace in the permanent removal of the predator from society. Schaefer spent the next 2 decades in a concrete cell, boasting about other unsolved cases to anyone who would listen. His twisted reign of psychological manipulation concluded inside the violent walls of the maximum security facility. On July 25, 1995, a fellow inmate entered the cell of Gerard Schaefer, holding a makeshift weapon crafted from stolen metal. The inmate unleashed a frenzied physical attack. This unyielding assault left the former lawman lifeless on the cold concrete floor. The end of the disgraced deputy closed the book on one of the most severe betrayals of public trust in the history of Florida. While Schaefer utilized the authority of an adult law enforcement officer to conceal his dark compulsions, other predators discover their terrifying capabilities long before they reach adulthood. In a completely different era, a seemingly normal 15-year-old girl would soon pick up a pen and a camera, documenting an equally horrifying descent into darkness. In October 2009, investigators operating deep within a Missouri forest stared down at a patch of disturbed earth hidden beneath a heavy blanket of autumn leaves. Hours later, agents from the Federal Bureau of Investigation stood inside a teenager's bedroom and opened a small blue journal. They read a handwritten passage that detailed the physical sensation of ending a human life, describing the experience as an absolute thrill. The author of those chilling words was a 15-year-old girl who had just led them directly to the shallow grave. The ink on the page was barely dry. St. Martin's, Missouri, sits quiet and isolated just west of the state capital. Tall oak trees line the narrow asphalt roads, casting long, dark shadows over the modest suburban homes as the sun dips below the horizon. The thick woods border the residential backyards, creating a dense barrier of brush and uneven terrain separating the properties. 9-year-old Elizabeth Olton lived in one of these houses on a dead-end road, surrounded by familiar faces and neighbors she trusted. She possessed a radiant, innocent energy, spending her afternoons playing outdoors and catching insects in the tall grass. Elizabeth navigated her small world with deep naivety, unaware of the darkness brewing just 4 doors down the street. Her home stood less than 300 feet away from the residence of 15-year-old Alyssa Bustamante. A thin strip of dense woods connected their 2 properties, creating a natural pathway between their back doors. Elizabeth often walked this exact path to visit her friends in the neighborhood. Alyssa presented a disturbing profile that the local mental health system failed to contain. She documented extreme self-harm and broadcasted her deteriorating mental state on vast public platforms. Child welfare workers and psychiatric professionals documented numerous red flags over several years, yet they allowed her to remain in an unregulated environment. Instead of receiving mandatory inpatient supervision, she bypassed basic state oversight through a series of bureaucratic technicalities and poor interagency communication. She maintained an active online presence, posting unlisted videos on YouTube where she simulated horrific acts of violence against her own siblings. In these digital recordings, she laughed into the camera, rehearsing the exact motions she would later use in reality. Law enforcement would later discover these digital footprints, exposing a massive blind spot in cyber monitoring protocols for troubled youths. The warning sign sat in plain sight on a massive public server, ignored by the adults responsible for community safety. Alyssa harbored intense predatory curiosities, using her digital camera as a training tool for an inevitable real-world tragedy. On the fading afternoon of October 21, 2009, the crisp autumn air settled over St. Martin's. Elizabeth walked out of her front door just after 5 o'clock to play with the younger siblings of Alyssa Bustamante. The walk required her to cross the short wooded distance between their homes, a journey she had made dozens of times without incident. Alyssa intercepted the young girl near the edge of the tree line. The teenager spoke in a hushed tone, using a fabricated story about a surprise hidden deep within the forest to lure Elizabeth away from the safety of her yard. Elizabeth trusted the older girl and followed her past the final row of oak trees. The dense canopy blocked out the remaining daylight, plunging the forest floor into a cold, disorienting gray twilight. Alyssa guided her target hundreds of yards off the main path, leading her into a secluded ravine shielded from the surrounding houses. In that isolated clearing, Alyssa acted on the violent urges she had rehearsed on video for months. She overpowered the small child, wrapping her hands around the young girl's neck to restrict her breathing. Alyssa then produced a sharp instrument, inflicting severe damage that extinguished Elizabeth's life in the quiet solitude of the woods. The perpetrator left her young neighbor in a pre-dug trench, tossing layers of dirt and dead leaves over the horrific scene to mask the disturbed soil. Alyssa then walked out of the forest, returning to her bedroom as if nothing had occurred. She sat at her desk, pulled out her blue journal, and documented the raw exhilaration of the act with a pen. She recorded the physical sensations of the event, immortalizing her triumph on paper while Elizabeth's family began to panic. The 9-year-old child lay abandoned in the cold earth, stripped of her future by a predator hiding behind a teenage face. As night fell, Elizabeth's mother realized her daughter had not returned for dinner and began dialing neighbors in a frantic search. The mother called the Bustamante household, asking if Elizabeth was still playing with the younger siblings. Alyssa answered the telephone and stated that Elizabeth had left their house hours ago to walk back home. A wave of profound dread washed over the mother, prompting an immediate call to the local emergency dispatch center. Officers from the Cole County Sheriff Department arrived within the hour, illuminating the quiet street with flashing red and blue lights. Search and rescue teams established a command post at the edge of the woods, deploying thermal imaging cameras and tracking dogs. Volunteers combed through the thick underbrush, shining flashlights into the dense vegetation while calling out the missing child's name. The search efforts stretched through the night, yet the treacherous terrain yielded zero concrete clues regarding her whereabouts. By the morning of October 22nd, agents from the Federal Bureau of Investigation joined the massive community mobilization. They began conducting systematic neighborhood canvassings, interviewing every resident within a 1-mile radius of the Olton home. Investigators hit an immediate dead end when a local resident claimed to have seen a strange vehicle idling near the woods. Authorities wasted precious hours tracking down the license plate of this suspicious car, diverting vital manpower away from the immediate neighborhood. The vehicle owner possessed an airtight alibi, transforming the entire lead into a frustrating waste of investigative resources. While detectives chased this phantom suspect, Alyssa Bustamante attended school and sat through her classes with total composure. She watched the massive search effort unfold from her classroom window, absorbing the chaos she had orchestrated alone. The authorities possessed no initial reason to suspect a teenage girl, allowing her to move without restriction while the community tore itself apart in panic. The investigative focus shifted back to the immediate neighbors on the evening of October 22nd. Detectives knocked on the Bustamante door for a secondary, routine follow-up interview to establish an exact timeline of the previous afternoon. During this conversation, a sharp-eyed investigator noted subtle inconsistencies in Alyssa's account of when Elizabeth departed the property. The timeline she provided contradicted the statements given by her younger siblings, creating a glaring discrepancy that demanded further scrutiny. Agents requested permission to seize her electronic devices, aiming to cross-reference her digital communications with her verbal statements. Analysts at the State Cybercrime Division extracted deleted internet histories, uncovering a vast footprint of disturbing YouTube videos. These digital files showcased the teenager simulating graphic violence and expressing a deep, unrelenting desire to harm others. The horrific nature of these videos provided law enforcement with the exact behavioral profile they needed to escalate their approach. Armed with the terrifying YouTube evidence, agents requested that Alyssa undergo a formal polygraph examination at the local headquarters on the morning of October 23rd. The teenager sat inside a sterile, windowless interrogation room under the harsh glare of fluorescent lights. The polygraph administrator asked direct, precise questions regarding Elizabeth's disappearance, searching for any physiological indicators of deception. Alyssa failed the polygraph test with 0 passing marks, triggering a tense interrogation orchestrated by seasoned federal agents. The detectives presented her with the timeline discrepancies and the violent digital footprint, backing her into an inescapable logical corner. The investigators applied relentless psychological pressure, breaking down her carefully constructed facade piece by piece. They cornered her with the physical impossibility of her timeline, demanding to know the exact fate of the 9-year-old child. The room descended into heavy silence as the teenager stared at the blank walls, calculating her final move. The wall of deception shattered. Alyssa broke eye contact, She admitted her actions. The teenager confessed to taking the young girl's life. She agreed to show the agents the exact location. Heavy tactical boots crunched against the autumn leaves. The group marched into the dense Missouri forest. Alyssa guided the federal agents past the search perimeters. She stopped near a steep, isolated drop-off. The suspect pointed a single finger toward a mound of disturbed dirt. Crime scene technicians secured the perimeter. They removed the top layer of foliage. The grim discovery confirmed the worst possible outcome. Elizabeth rested in the shallow trench. Detectives dispatched a secondary team back to the Bustamante residence. Agents raided the teenager's bedroom. They seized a small blue journal hidden among her possessions. Investigators opened the pages. The handwriting revealed a chilling, premeditated timeline. Alyssa had dug the grave several days before the horrific event occurred. In the year 2012, Alyssa Bustamante faced the reality of her actions inside a Cole County courtroom. The defense team attempted to leverage the juvenile justice system, arguing that her documented mental health struggles diminished her ultimate responsibility. Prosecutors countered this narrative by highlighting the profound premeditation evident in the pre-dug grave and the horrific journal entries, to avoid a publicized trial and a potential maximum penalty. She accepted a calculated plea agreement. Alyssa pleaded guilty to second-degree charges regarding the loss of human life and armed criminal action. The judge rejected any leniency associated with her young age, focusing on the extreme maliciousness of the crime. The court sentenced her to life in prison with the possibility of parole, adding a consecutive 30-year sentence for the weapon charge. The strict consecutive nature of these sentences ensured she would face decades behind bars before ever seeing a parole board. Alyssa Bustamante remains incarcerated at the Chillicothe Correctional Center, isolated from the community she shattered. The Olton family endures an unimaginable void, forever mourning a radiant 9-year-old girl whose future was stolen by a neighbor she considered a friend. Systemic failures allowed clear, broadcasted warning signs to slip through the cracks of the mental health apparatus. If authorities had acted on the violent YouTube videos earlier, Elizabeth might still be catching insects in her front yard today. The tragedy stands as a grim reminder of the darkness that can fester behind a digital screen. Predatory behaviors often leave a trail of electronic evidence long before they manifest in the physical world. Some offenders use video platforms to rehearse their darkest fantasies before turning those nightmares into reality. A similar obsession with recording terror emerged in Florida, where a desperate man trapped inside a suffocating suitcase became the star of a horrific smartphone video. It is February of the year 2020, Winter Park. Florida homicide investigators swipe through a suspect's confiscated smartphone. The digital screen brightens, revealing a large blue suitcase sitting on a living room rug. A muffled, desperate voice pleads from inside the luggage, stating he cannot breathe. A woman stands behind the camera laughing and mocking his distress. The video cuts to black. The physical environment of this tragedy requires specific geographical context. Winter Park sits as a bustling commercial and residential hub in Central Florida. Sarah Boone and her boyfriend, Jorge Torres Jr., shared an apartment in a second-floor complex off a busy local avenue. Concrete stairs led up to their front door inside the residence. A narrow living room flowed into a small kitchen space. A carpeted, 14-step staircase led up to the solitary second-floor master bedroom. Jorge was a father of 3 children. He possessed a deep capacity to love, yet found himself trapped in a chaotic domestic environment. He wanted to provide a stable home for his family. He spent years navigating a tumultuous bond with his girlfriend. Their relationship operated as a pendulum of extreme highs and devastating lows. Immense alcohol consumption fueled the constant chaos. The apartment echoed with shouting matches on a routine basis. Neighbors called local dispatchers countless times to report the disturbances. Authorities arrived at the front door, took notes on their notepads, and left the scene. The local system treated their domestic disputes as routine nuisance calls. Officers documented the noise complaints but ignored the escalating physical danger. The cycle of toxic behavior persisted without intervention. Jorge bore the brunt of the emotional volatility. He endured the hostile environment, hoping the situation would stabilize. The physical layout of the residence played a crucial role in the impending disaster. Downstairs served as the center of social activity and heavy drinking. Upstairs offered total isolation behind a closed solid wood door. On a late winter evening, the lower level would transform from a casual drinking spot into an inescapable trap. The evening of February 23, 2020, began with a puzzle and multiple bottles of wine. Sarah and Jorge spent hours consuming high volumes of alcohol in the kitchen, empty glass bottles piled up on the counter. The apartment grew quiet as the night deepened. The couple decided to play a game of hide and seek. A large, hard-shell blue suitcase sat empty in the center of the living room rug. The luggage measured 3 feet tall and 2 feet wide. It featured a heavy-duty metal zipper tracking around its perimeter. Jorge displayed a playful demeanor and agreed to climb inside the dark enclosure. He folded his adult frame into the cramped interior, his knees pressed against his chest, his head tucked downward toward his torso. The physical space offered minimal room for his body mass. Sarah grabbed the metal zipper pulls. She dragged them around the tough fabric border. The interlocking teeth closed the gap, the heavy fabric sealed shut. She eliminated all external light and fresh air from the compartment. Jorge was now dependent on Sarah to open the enclosure. Instead of unzipping the luggage after a few seconds, Sarah reached into her pocket. She withdrew her smartphone. She opened the camera application and pressed the record button. The lens focused on the bulging blue fabric. Jorge remained compressed inside, assuming the game would end soon. He waited in total darkness, the dense material pressed against his face. The oxygen levels within the tight compartment began dropping. The game transitioned into a localized hostage situation on the living room floor. Inside the dark void, Jorge realized the metal lock would not yield from the inside. He began shifting his body weight. The large blue rectangle tipped and rolled across the carpet. His muffled voice pierced the thick fabric. He called out her name. He stated clear words warning her that he could not breathe. The smartphone camera captured the entire ordeal. Sarah stood above the luggage, holding the device steady. She did not reach for the zipper. She projected her voice loud enough for the microphone to catch every syllable. She mocked his distress. She told him this was the punishment he deserved for past transgressions. She utilized his physical containment as a tool for extreme psychological torture. The physiological reality of his confinement escalated without delay. A human being requires constant air circulation to survive. The sealed enclosure blocked all fresh oxygen from entering the space. Jorge pushed his fingers against the inner seam. He attempted to pry the metal teeth apart. The zipper held firm. He gasped for air, inhaling his own expelled carbon dioxide. The concentration of toxic gas built up in the tiny space. His pleas grew more desperate in tone. He shouted that his life was in true danger. Sarah continued to film the struggle. She held the phone over the shifting luggage. She laughed at his panic. She stated that he was experiencing the exact feeling she felt when he betrayed her. The torture session lasted for several minutes before Sarah stopped the recording. She pocketed her phone. She looked at the blue suitcase in the center of the room. Jorge was still moving, still fighting for oxygen. Instead of freeing him, Sarah turned away. She walked past the luggage. She placed her hand on the wooden banister. She climbed the 14 steps to the second-floor bedroom. She shut the bedroom door, cutting off the sounds of his muffled cries. She climbed into her bed. She pulled the blankets up and fell asleep. The distance between the upstairs bed and the downstairs living room was less than 40 feet. The wooden floorboards and the closed door drowned out the sound of a man fighting for his final breaths. Hours ticked by in absolute silence. The sun rose on the morning of February 24th, 2020. Downstairs, the blue luggage sat motionless on the carpet. Inside, the frantic struggle had ceased long ago. Horge's lungs had exhausted the final microscopic pockets of oxygen. His body had shut down. Sarah slept through the entire morning. She remained unconscious well into the afternoon. She stirred from her bed around 1 o'clock. She navigated down the carpeted staircase. The empty wine bottles still cluttered the kitchen counter. She noticed the blue suitcase resting in the exact spot she left it the night before. Sarah approached the luggage. She grabbed the zipper and pulled it back. She unsealed the compartment. Horge lay trapped inside, unresponsive. His skin displayed a deep purple hue. His body was stiff. Sarah grabbed her phone and dialed the local emergency dispatch number. The operator answered the call. Sarah spoke in a frantic tone. She claimed she and her boyfriend were playing a game the previous night. She stated they drank excessive wine. He got into the luggage, and she went to sleep. She told the dispatcher she assumed he would get out on his own. She feigned ignorance of the locking mechanism. She presented herself as a confused woman who made a tragic mistake. Law enforcement deputies arrived at the Winter Park residence within minutes. They secured the scene. They found Horge's lifeless form inside the blue enclosure. Paramedics declared him deceased on the spot. Detectives began processing the living room. They documented the empty alcohol containers. They examined the heavy-duty zipper on the luggage. Sarah sat on the exterior concrete stairs, speaking with a deputy. She repeated her narrative of the innocent hide-and-seek game. She emphasized her deep slumber. The authorities faced a complex scene. A man expired inside a closed object. The sole living witness claimed it was a freak accident. The physical evidence at the scene offered no initial contradiction to her story. The detectives needed a way to peer into the past. They asked for consent to search her cellular device. Sarah handed the phone over without hesitation, believing she had erased the worst parts of the night. The chronological end of the crime arrived in an austere interrogation room. Detectives sat across from Sarah. They held her smartphone in their hands. Forensic technicians had utilized specialized software to extract the deleted digital files. The extraction revealed 2 separate videos. The investigators pressed play. The audio filled the small concrete room. Horge's muffled voice echoed off the walls. He begged for air. He pleaded for his life. Sarah's distinct voice responded from the device speaker. She laughed. She taunted him. She told him he belonged in the dark space. The investigators watched the screen. The blue suitcase rolled and shifted on the digital recording. The zipper remained sealed tight. The physical evidence shattered her defense. This was no tragic accident. She did not walk upstairs assuming he would free himself. She watched him suffocate. She mocked his inability to breathe. She wielded the airtight luggage as a weapon. The lie collapsed. The detectives confronted her with the undeniable truth. Her own hand held the camera. Her own voice provided the narration. She created a localized torture chamber in her own living room. She abandoned a living father of 3 to expire in a tiny box. She recorded the exact moments that stole his future. The video left zero room for interpretation. The game was a calculated execution. Deputies placed Sarah in handcuffs. They escorted her to the Orange County Jail. The state charged her with ending a human life in the 2nd degree. The legal process that followed exposed a flawed justice system. The courts guarantee every defendant the right to legal counsel. Sarah weaponized this right to stall the proceedings. Over the next 4 years, she clashed with 8 separate court-appointed defense attorneys. She filed handwritten letters to the judge attacking her lawyer's competence. She utilized administrative loopholes to fire her counsel. The trial date faced delay after delay. The system allowed a single defendant to grind the wheels of justice to a halt. She attempted to claim she suffered from battered spouse syndrome. She argued her actions were rooted in self-defense against a history of abuse. The prosecution pointed straight back to the smartphone video. The footage showed an aggressor taunting a helpless victim. The legal maneuvers met their end. In October of the year 2024, a jury sat in the courtroom to view the evidence. They watched the blue suitcase shift on the screen. They heard Jorge beg for air. They heard Sarah laugh. The deliberation was swift. The jury found her guilty of the second-degree charge relating to his demise. The verdict cemented her fate, ensuring she would face decades behind concrete walls. Jorge's family received a measure of closure after years of legal manipulation. The horrific digital footprint she created served as her absolute undoing. However, this level of callous documentation is not an isolated phenomenon in the dark annals of criminal history. A fact made clear when investigators began searching a pink house in Ontario, Canada, looking for missing schoolgirls. In 1993, law enforcement officers spent 71 days dismantling a seemingly ordinary pink house in Ontario, missing the hidden 8mm videotapes that would soon traumatize a nation. The footage of two missing teenagers enduring unimaginable horrors at the hands of a husband and wife was retrieved from a dropped bathroom ceiling by the defense attorney of the primary suspect. This trusted officer of the court took the cassettes, placed them in a secure lockbox, and withheld the definitive proof from investigators for 16 excruciating months. The ultimate revelation of these tapes would shatter a constructed web of lies and expose a legal failure so catastrophic that it forever altered the Canadian justice system. Paul Bernardo presented the perfect illusion of suburban success to the outside world. He worked as an ambitious accountant, wore tailored suits, and possessed a superficial charm that disarmed strangers. In 1991, he married Carla Homolka in a lavish, extravagant fairy tale wedding complete with horse-drawn carriages and expensive ice sculptures. The young couple perched at a picturesque pink house situated in the quiet, affluent suburb of St. Catharines, Ontario. Their residence sat at 57 Bayview Drive, overlooking the calm waters of Lake Ontario. Neighbors saw an attractive pair who took pride in their manicured lawn and seemingly perfect relationship. The physical geography of their home featured a typical suburban layout with a master bedroom upstairs and a finished basement that would later become a site of absolute dread. Behind the pastel paint and the smiling photographs, Paul concealed his true identity as a notorious serial attacker who had terrorized the community of Scarborough for years. Carla played the role of the devoted wife, maintaining the facade of domestic bliss, far removed from the dark reality brewing on Bayview Drive. Two innocent teenagers lived ordinary, joyful lives filled with youthful promise. Leslie Mahaffey was 14 years old, a bright student who loved dancing, spending time with her close-knit family, and chatting with friends on the telephone. She lived in Burlington, a quiet suburban community just miles away from St. Catharines. Kristen French was 15 years old, invested in her high school athletic programs, and known for her fierce loyalty to her rowing team. Kristen resided in the neighboring town of St. Catharines, walking the familiar tree-lined streets between her school and her home. Both girls represented the absolute safest, most cherished aspects of Canadian suburban life during the early 1990s. They held curfews, attended community events, and trusted the familiar faces that populated their respective neighborhoods. Neither teenager possessed any reason to suspect that a well-dressed accountant driving a gold Nissan sports car was hunting the streets for vulnerable targets. Their futures shone with infinite potential, unblemished by the encroaching shadows of a predator operating in plain sight. The horrific escalation began in June of 1991. Leslie Mahaffey attended a summer gathering with friends and missed her curfew, arriving at her Burlington home late at night to find the front door locked. Rather than wake her parents, she chose to wait outside in the humid summer air. A small decision that placed her in the direct path of Paul Bernardo. He approached the property, utilized his rehearsed charm, and forced the terrified 14-year-old into his vehicle. He drove her across the regional highway network directly to the Pink House on Bayview Drive. The physical layout of the home proved critical, as the couple isolated Leslie in the upper master bedroom away from the prying eyes of their neighbors. During her agonizing captivity, Paul introduced a handheld camcorder into the room. He directed Carla to film his horrific actions, demanding she capture every moment of the psychological and physical torment on tape. Carla held the camera steady, adjusting the focus and recording the nightmare as an active, willing participant in the destruction of a young life. Less than a year later, in April of 1992, the husband and wife duo struck again on a quiet Thursday afternoon. Kristen French walked home from her high school along the edge of a church parking lot, unaware of the gold Nissan idling nearby. Paul and Carla operated as a synchronized team, executing a planned ambush on the 15-year-old student. Carla engaged Kristen in conversation under the guise of asking for directions, creating a false sense of security that halted the teenager in her tracks. Paul then lunged from the vehicle, forcing Kristen into the cramped back seat before skeeting away towards St. Catharines. Once again, they utilized the physical isolation of the Pink House to hold a teenager captive against her will. The camcorder remained a central element of their terrifying routine. Paul ordered his wife to operate the recording equipment, documenting the systematic breaking of Kristen over several days. The footage captured not only the profound dread experienced by the victims, but also the cold and casual demeanor of the couple orchestrating their permanent end. The Niagara Regional Police launched massive search efforts following the disappearances, mobilizing hundreds of volunteers to comb through ravines and wooded areas. Weeks turned into agonizing months of slow, methodical grid searches across southern Ontario. Investigators knocked on thousands of doors, distributed missing person flyers, and fielded endless tips from a panicked public. The community dread materialized into a grim reality when authorities located Leslie Mahaffey encased in concrete blocks, submerged in Lake Gibson. The discovery site sat mere miles from the Bayview Drive residence, yet the sheer volume of leads overwhelmed the local precinct. Following the disappearance of Kristen French, a parallel search effort dominated the national news broadcasts. Dog handlers scored the heavy brush along a rural Conception road in Burlington, finding the missing teenager abandoned in a wooded ditch. Detectives cataloged the physical evidence at both dump sites, taking soil samples, photographing tire tracks, and measuring the exact distances between the victims and the roadway. Despite collecting massive amounts of physical data, law enforcement lacked a central suspect to tie the distinct locations together. A catastrophic systemic failure crippled the investigation during its most crucial phase. Detectives in the neighboring jurisdiction of Toronto possessed distinct biological evidence linking a serial attacker to dozens of home invasions in the Scarborough area. Paul Bernardo lived in Scarborough during those exact attacks, and his biological profile matched the perpetrator operating in that region. However, deep jurisdictional disjointedness prevented the Toronto Task Force from communicating with the Niagara Regional Police. The two distinct law enforcement agencies utilized incompatible computer databases, stalling the flow of vital suspect information. Rigid communication protocols dictated that detectives could only share paper files through official channels, which took weeks to process. A junior officer in Toronto flagged Paul as a potential suspect for the Scarborough attacks months before Kristen French vanished. The paperwork languished on a desk, trapped in an endless bureaucratic queue while the perpetrator continued his reign of terror in St. Catharines. This exact paperwork, error, and refusal to bypass formal jurisdictional boundaries allowed a known predator to remain free in the community. Investigators began closing the net in late 1992 when they connected the gold Nissan sports car to the church parking lot abduction. Detectives visited the Bayview Drive residence, conducting a standard interview with Paul and Carla at their front door. The couple projected an aura of absolute calm, answering basic timeline questions while standing just feet above the very basement where their dark secrets remained hidden. Officers noted the make and model of the vehicle in the driveway but left the property without requesting a search warrant. The police required definitive biological matches to proceed, relying on cutting-edge technology that processed at a slow pace. Technicians at the Central Forensic Laboratory in Toronto faced a massive backlog of thousands of samples. Extracting and amplifying the genetic material required months of delicate laboratory work, leaving the active investigation suspended in a terrifying limbo. Detectives worked daily to eliminate other suspects, chasing false tips, and reviewing useless alibis provided by the public. The daily grind of detective work yielded nothing but dead ends, while the true monster lived quietly in the affluent suburbs. The dynamics inside the Pink House deteriorated as Paul directed his violent tendencies toward his own wife. Carla endured severe domestic abuse, culminating in a brutal physical altercation that sent her to a local hospital in early 1993. Realizing the forensic net was closing due to the ongoing laboratory tests, she initiated a calculated strategy to save herself. Carla reached out to the police through her legal representation, offering partial truths regarding the missing teenagers. She wove a careful narrative that positioned herself solely as a captive victim, helpless under the absolute control of a terrifying husband. Desperate to secure a conviction in the high-profile disappearances, the Crown prosecutors made a catastrophic legal decision. They offered Carla a highly controversial plea agreement, granting her immense leniency in exchange for her testimony against Paul. The legal loophole required her to serve only 12 years in a federal penitentiary, a fraction of the standard penalty for her alleged role. This specific deal, forever known as the deal with the devil, bound the hands of prosecutors before they uncovered the full scope of her involvement. Law enforcement officials arrested Paul Bernardo in February of 1993, based primarily on the genetic evidence processed by the laboratory and the statements provided by Carla. Investigators descended upon the 57 Bayview Drive address, executing a massive search warrant that lasted for 71 consecutive days. Forensic teams dismantled the Pink House piece by piece, removing floorboards, stripping away drywall, and hauling away countless boxes of personal belongings. They cataloged every inch of the property, searching for the ultimate physical proof of the horrors that occurred within those walls. Despite the intensive 71-day search, the local police failed to check a specific recessed light fixture hidden in the drop ceiling of the bathroom. The crucial piece of the puzzle remained hidden in the dark void above the plaster. Months later, Paul instructed his defense attorney to visit the empty, unguarded house to retrieve a specific package. The attorney walked into the vacant property, reached into the exact ceiling fixture Paul described, and pulled out a locked metal box containing the 8mm tapes. Instead of surrendering this massive evidentiary find, the attorney locked the tapes in a desk drawer and kept them secret for 16 long months. The tension reached an absolute breaking point in September of 1994 when the defense attorney resigned from the case and surrendered the hidden lockbox to the authorities. Investigators gathered in a secure viewing room in Toronto, sliding the pristine 8mm cassettes into a heavy metal video player. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as the small television screen flickered to life, illuminating the faces of hardened detectives. The footage began to play, shattering the prolonged silence with the crystal-clear audio of the agonizing captivity. The video displayed the exact spatial layout of the master bedroom, showing the heavy wooden doors and the specific placement of the camera on a tripod. Paul Bernardo appeared on screen, directing a symphony of psychological dread and physical torture with sickening arrogance. The detective sat paralyzed, watching the absolute worst elements of human nature unfold on the glowing monitor. Every missing piece of the chronological timeline snapped into place as the tapes revealed the exact methods used to break the young victims. The horrific reality of their final days played out in undeniable, high-definition terror. The most terrifying revelation captured on the 8mm tapes involved the actions of Karla Homolka. Her constructed victim narrative evaporated the second she appeared in the frame, destroying the foundation of her unprecedented plea agreement. The footage showed her adjusting the camera lens, issuing commands, and participating in the relentless psychological attacks with zero hesitation. She operated the equipment with a steady hand, ensuring the lighting illuminated the suffering of the captive teenagers. There stood no evidence of coercion, no sign of a terrified wife forced into compliance by a dominating husband. Instead, the video proved she existed as a willing, sadistic partner who found dark satisfaction in stealing the futures of innocent girls. Prosecutors stared at the television screen in absolute horror, realizing they had signed an unbreakable legal contract with a monster. The strict parameters of the Canadian legal code prevented the Crown from revoking the plea deal, chaining them to a catastrophic mistake. The law enforcement community realized that one of the most prolific perpetrators in their history had manipulated her way into a light sentence through their own systemic failures. The trial of Paul Bernardo commenced in 1995, drawing enormous crowds to the courthouse steps in downtown Toronto. The prosecution presented the irrefutable video evidence behind closed doors, shielding the general public from the explicit visual horrors while ensuring the jury understood the sheer magnitude of the crimes. The devastating footage left zero room for a viable legal defense, sealing the fate of the disgraced accountant. The jury delivered a definitive guilty verdict on multiple charges, ensuring he met the harshest penalty available under the law. A judge designated Paul as a dangerous offender, a specific classification that resulted in an indeterminate life sentence with zero chance of parole. The families of Leslie Mahaffey and Kristen French endured the unbearable pain of the trial with immense grace, fighting to ensure their daughters were remembered for their bright lives rather than their tragic ends. The pink house on Bayview Drive was eventually purchased by the local municipality and demolished, erasing the physical monument to their suffering. Today, an empty lot sits at the address, fading into the mundane background of the affluent suburb. Karla Homolka retreated into the federal penitentiary system, serving her designated 12 years under immense public scrutiny. The massive public outcry over her lenient sentence triggered sweeping demands for severe legal reform across the nation, highlighting the catastrophic danger of rushing plea negotiations. Despite the undeniable video proof of her deep complicity, the rigid structure of the justice system meant she walked out of the prison gates as a free woman in 2005. She relocated, changed her name, and faded into the anonymous masses, leaving behind a legacy of absolute betrayal. The families of the victims continued their lifelong advocacy, working to close the exact legal loopholes that allowed a willing participant to escape true justice. While the tapes hidden in the ceiling of a suburban home documented a prolonged nightmare, sometimes a single photograph can capture the precise moment a life is permanently altered. Far south of the Canadian border, an interstate truck driver maintained his own chilling collection of visual trophies. One specific image recovered from his possession featured a 14-year-old girl named Regina Walters with freshly shorn hair, wearing a black dress and heels, holding her hands up defensively in an abandoned barn as she faced her absolute end. A grainy photograph exists deep within police evidence archives. The image captures a 14-year-old girl standing inside an abandoned barn. She wears a black dress and dark heels. The monster cut her hair in jagged patches close to her scalp. She holds her hands up in a defensive, terrified posture. The lens of the camera belongs to a predator who built a rolling house of horrors inside an 18-wheeler. This single frame freezes the exact moment before a vulnerable runaway met a grim, permanent end. Pasadena, Texas. In the late 1980s, was a bustling industrial suburb outside of Houston. The heavy scent of oil refineries hung thick in the humid coastal air. Neighborhoods consisted of modest single-story homes with peeling paint and chain-link fences. 14-year-old Regina K. Walters lived in one of these quiet subdivisions. She possessed a bright, trusting spirit but struggled with the heavy emotional weight of family turbulence. The harsh sodium streetlights of Pasadena offered little comfort to a teenager seeking escape from her daily reality. She often found solace in the company of her teenage boyfriend, Ricky Lee Jones. Ricky understood her desire to leave their hometown behind and start fresh somewhere new. They spent their evenings walking the cracked concrete sidewalks, planning a departure. In February of 1990, the two teenagers decided to turn their desperate plans into reality. They packed major belongings into soft duffel bags and slipped away from their homes. The sprawling Texas highway system stretched out before them like a ribbon of endless possibility. Interstate 10 cuts a massive, unforgiving line across the southern United States. Wide-open shoulders and desolate rest stops punctuate the massive distances between urban centers. Regina and Ricky stood on the gravel shoulder holding out their thumbs to passing traffic. They possessed zero knowledge of the dark predators who patrolled these massive concrete corridors. Hitchhiking carried a romanticized aura of freedom for troubled youth during this era. They saw only an adventure blind to the rolling nightmare headed their way. An immense 18-wheeler slowed down and pulled onto the gravel shoulder near the two runaway teenagers. The massive diesel engine idled with a deafening, rhythmic rumble that shook the ground beneath their feet. The driver, Robert Ben Roades, swung open the heavy metal passenger door and offered them a ride. Rhodes projected a calm, authoritative demeanor that disarmed the exhausted and naive travelers. Regina and Ricky climbed up the steep aluminum steps into the spacious elevated cab. They settled into the passenger area, relieved to rest their tired legs. The truck merged back onto the roaring interstate, picking up speed as the Texas landscape blurred past the windows. The teenagers failed to notice the heavy locks installed on the inside of the passenger doors. They had just sealed themselves inside a soundproof, mobile prison. The layout of the truck cab revealed a horrifying, concealed reality. Behind the front seats sat a sleeper cabin that Roades had reinforced and modified. Thick soundproofing materials lined the walls to absorb any noise. Specialized restraints and heavy metal chains hung hidden beneath the sleeping bunk. Shortly after crossing out of Texas, the atmosphere inside the cab shifted from friendly to hostile. Roades dropped his welcoming facade and initiated a sudden, brutal assault on the young couple. Ricky Lee Jones presented an immediate threat to the driver and required rapid elimination. Rhodes overtook the teenage boy, ensuring Ricky met a permanent violent end within seconds. He disposed of Ricky on the desolate roadside, leaving Regina alone and trapped with her captor. Back in Pasadena, the families of Regina and Ricky noticed their absence and contacted the local police department. The response from local law enforcement initiated a cascade of infuriating systemic failures. In the year 1990, rigid police protocols classified absent teenagers as voluntary runaways. Dispatchers generated standard missing person reports but assigned the files the lowest possible investigative priority. Officers conducted zero active searches along the local highway corridors. Detectives failed to interview witnesses at the truck stops or request regional highway patrol logs. The strict jurisdictional boundaries meant Pasadena police possessed no authority to track movement beyond their city limits. Without any evidence of a struggle at their homes, the system simply assumed the teenagers would return in time. The flawed framework of missing persons databases allowed a predator to operate unchecked on the interstate system. While the official police files collected dust on a desk in Texas, Regina endured an unimaginable reality inside the moving truck. Roades drove his massive rig across state lines, utilizing the fragmented nature of highway law enforcement to his advantage. A state trooper in Louisiana had no direct radio communication with a sheriff in Arkansas. The national databases for tracking criminal vehicles remained outdated, siloed, and slow. Roades utilized this massive legal loophole by constantly changing his routes and never staying in one county for more than a day. He forced Regina into the dark, windowless sleeper berth while he picked up standard freight loads. The deafening hum of the diesel engine masked the desperate cries of the young girl trapped just inches behind the driver's seat. She lost all sense of time and physical geography as the truck rumbled through endless miles of black asphalt. Roades subjected the young teenager to a calculated campaign of severe psychological destruction. He stripped away her identity by cutting off her long hair with jagged scissors. He left her hair in an uneven crop close to her scalp to assert total physical dominance. The trucker possessed a sinister obsession with documenting his control over his captives. He kept a collection of specific clothing items, including a black dress and matching heels, stored in the sleeper cab. Roades forced Regina to dress in these specific garments for terrifying photo sessions. He broke her hope, explaining that no police officers were searching for her and no one cared about a runaway. The young girl endured this hidden torment for several weeks as the season slowly transitioned from winter to spring. Every passing mile marker solidified the horrifying truth that help was not coming. The investigation back in Texas remained stagnant throughout the month of March. Pasadena detectives hit a factual dead end when they received a tip that the couple might be in Mexico. An anonymous caller claimed to have seen two teenagers matching their description crossing the southern border. Investigators diverted their limited resources toward verifying this useless international lead, contacting Border Patrol agents in Brownsville. Weeks slipped by as administrative requests traveled through federal bureaucratic channels. Detectives drafted formal inquiries on paper, mailed them to border authorities, and waited for physical responses. This specific paperwork delay created a massive blind spot for the local investigators. No official ever thought to check the massive commercial trucking hubs or way stations along Interstate 10. The lack of communication between local police and the Department of Transportations allowed Roades to drive right through their jurisdictions undetected. By late March, the 18-wheeler crossed into the rural agricultural plains of Illinois. The physical landscape shifted from congested southern highways to vast empty stretches of flat farmland. Roades navigated his heavy truck off the main interstate and onto a quiet, unpaved county road. The gravel crunched loudly beneath the massive tires as he drove deeper into isolation. He scanned the desolate horizon for a specific type of environment to conclude his terrifying ritual. The cold spring wind swept across the barren, dormant cornfields devoid of any civilian traffic or farm workers. The truck slowed to a halt beside an abandoned, dilapidated barn situated far back from the road. The structure featured rotting wooden planks, a sagging roof, and large, shadowy interior spaces. This isolated geographical location provided the absolute privacy Roades required for his final, devastating act. Roades unlocked the heavy passenger door and pulled the terrified teenager out of the truck cab. He forced Regina to put on the black dress and the dark heels one final time. He guided her through the tall, dead grass toward the gaping entrance of the rotting barn. Inside the structure, the air felt freezing and smelled of damp earth and decaying wood. Thin beams of pale sunlight pierced through the massive cracks in the wooden walls, casting long shadows across the dirt floor. Roads retrieved his camera, adjusted the flash, and ordered the young girl to stand against a wooden stall. Regina raised her hands toward her face in a desperate defensive posture. Her wide, terrified eyes stared into the camera lens, recognizing the absolute certainty of her fate. The flash illuminated the dark barn for a fraction of a second, freezing her final moment of sheer terror on film. Immediately after the heavy mechanical click of the camera shutter echoed through the empty barn, the predator discarded his device. The physical distance between the camera and the young girl vanished as Roads closed the gap. He cornered the vulnerable runaway against the decaying wooden planks, cutting off any possible avenue of escape. The sheer physical strength of the truck driver overwhelmed the exhausted, malnourished teenager. Roads initiated a fatal, breathless assault, violently compressing the young girl until she could no longer draw air. Regina fought desperately in the cold shadows of the barn, but her strength quickly faded. She took her final breath on the dirt floor, meeting a brutal, permanent end thousands of miles from her home. Rhodes left her remains hidden in the agricultural structure, walking back to his idling truck. He climbed into the driver's seat, shifted the massive gears, and drove away, leaving a horrific secret behind in the Illinois farmland. The reign of terror on the highways concluded in April of 1990 on a remote stretch of Interstate 10 in Arizona. An Arizona state trooper noticed an 18-wheeler parked illegally on the shoulder with its hazard lights flashing. The trooper approached the cab to conduct a routine commercial vehicle inspection and check on the driver. Upon opening the door, the officer made a grim discovery, catching Roads assaulting another kidnapped woman in the sleeper berth. The trooper drew his service weapon, subdued the massive truck driver, and secured the traumatized victim. A subsequent search of the truck cab revealed the terrifying photographic evidence of his previous atrocities. Investigators developed the film found in his possession, revealing the haunting image of Regina Walters in the abandoned barn. Months later, an Illinois farmer investigating a foul odor on his property located the remains of the young teenager. Forensic analysis and the undeniable photographic evidence linked Robert Ben Rhodes to the horrific crimes. Extradited to Illinois, the truck driver faced an overwhelming mountain of physical proof that negated any possible defense strategy. Knowing he could not fight the visual documentation of his own making, Roads pleaded guilty to his actions. The court handed down a definitive verdict, delivering multiple life sentences without the possibility of parole. State penal protocols ensured the predator would spend the absolute remainder of his natural life confined within a concrete cell. The families of Regina K. Walters and Ricky Lee Jones received a grim, devastating closure regarding the teenagers who simply vanished. The horrific image of the 14-year-old girl remains a terrifying testament to the monsters who patrol the open roads. The chilling reality of predators capturing their own atrocities brings us to the end of our dark journey today. The terrifying reality of these cases is that these monsters possessed an arrogant compulsion to hit record and preserve their atrocities forever. As you ask yourself who might be watching you right now, thank you for watching. Click the video on your screen for another deep dive into the darkest corners of true crime. The terrifying reality of these cases is that these monsters did not just commit unspeakable acts. They felt an arrogant compulsion to hit record and preserve their atrocities forever, as you ask yourself, who might be watching you right now. Thank you for watching. And click the video on your screen for another deep dive into the darkest corners of true crime.